This is my first time in Slovenia.
To je moj prvi obisk v Sloveniji.
And I have met some of Slovenian people this weekend and a couple of years ago.
Nekatere Slovence sem spoznala ta konec tedna, ki je minil, in nekaj let nazaj.
And I've always wanted to come here.
In vedno sem si želela priti sem.
So now I'm so thrilled to have an opportunity to see your beautiful country.
Zato sem zdaj vznemirjena, da imam to priložnost, da vidim vašo lepo deželo.
Somebody was telling me this weekend that this is supposed to be God's country.
Nekdo mi je ta konec tedna govoril, da bi to naj bila Božja dežela.
And I can see why.
In lahko vidim in razumem, zakaj.
And but more than anything, I have enjoyed getting to know some of you over this last weekend.
Ampak bolj kot karkoli drugega sem uživala v tem, ko sem nekatere od vas spoznala minuli konec tedna.
And I look forward to meeting a few more of you today here.
In veselim se, da bom nekatere spoznala tudi danes.
I bring greetings from our General Conference Health Ministries team.
Prinašam pozdrave iz generalne konference, iz našega tima, ki dela v zdravstvenem oddelku.
I'm one of the associate directors there, but we have Dr. Lendl as our director and two other colleagues as associate directors.
Jaz sem ena od pomočnic vodje, dr. Lendlesa, ki vodi ta oddelek.
And they all send greetings to the brothers and sisters here in Slovenia.
In vsi pozdravljajo brate in sestre tukaj v Sloveniji.
So today we'll have a wonderful opportunity to talk a little bit about an aspect of health that sometimes is neglected.
Danes bomo imeli priložnost govoriti o vidiku zdravja, ki je včasih zanemarjen.
And I hope that we will all enjoy what God has to bring us this afternoon.
In upam, da bomo vsi uživali v tem, kar nam Bog želi dati danes popoldan.
But as we begin, I'd like to ask a prayer and ask God to be with us. Is that okay?
Toda na začetku bi rada molila in povabila Boga, da je z nami.
Shall we bow our heads?
Sklonimo glave.
You may stand up if you wish.
Lahko vstanete, če želite.
Let us pray.
Molimo.
Dear Heavenly Father,
Dragi nebeški Oče,
we are so grateful, Lord, to be here on this holiday in your house.
hvaležni smo, da smo lahko na ta praznični dan tukaj v tvojem domu.
We are grateful that we can come together as your people freely and be able to worship and to learn together today.
Hvaležni, da se lahko kot tvoje ljudstvo svobodno zbiramo, te častimo in se učimo.
I ask, Lord, that you may send your Spirit and that you may abound in your presence in this place.
Prosim, da pošlješ svojega duha in da je tvoja navzočnost preobilno vidna danes na tem prostoru.
And as we talk about some of these important issues related to our health, that you can give us insights into how we can apply this in our lives.
In ko bomo govorili o pomembnih temah povezanih z našim zdravjem, da nam daš razumevanje, kako lahko to uporabimo v svojem življenju.
And help us not only to apply it in our lives, but also to use this to minister to people here in the communities that we live.
In pomaga nam, da ne le uporabimo to, ampak da s tem tudi služimo ljudem v skupnosti, v kateri živimo.
I pray this not because we deserve it, but we do it in the name of Jesus, our Savior.
To molim ne zato, ker si to zaslužimo, ampak ker molimo v Jezusovem imenu.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, so when we were talking about what to share with you today, I think we agreed that one area that we would want to talk about is how our thinking, how our mental health, our emotional health are linked to living well.
Ko smo se odločili o tem, o čemer spregovoriti danes tukaj, smo prišli do teme, kako je naše emocionalno zdravje, mentalno zdravje povezano z dobrim življenjem.
Especially during this pandemic, we have seen another epidemic of mental health issues.
V času te pandemije smo videli drugo epidemijo, in sicer težav na področju mentalnega zdravja.
We have been living in what I would call a dry place because of it.
Živeli smo in živimo v suhem kraju, kar tako kot jaz to imenujem.
For many people, life has become an empty place.
Za številne ljudi je življenje postalo nek prazen prostor.
Why?
Zakaj?
Because the pandemic has revealed a broken world.
Zato, ker je pandemija razkrila zlomljeni svet.
Broken because we have lost loved ones. Many millions have died.
Zlomljen zaradi tega, ker smo izgubili na milijone ljudi.
I know in the United States alone we are approaching 1 million deaths.
Vem, da se samo v Združenih državah Amerike približujemo številki milijon umrlih.
But not only that, we have seen how disease can spread so easily, so quickly, and take away our loved ones.
Ampak ne le to, videli smo tudi, kako se bolezen lahko hitro širi in navzame ljubljene osebe.
We have also seen political unrest and community unrest, people divided, fighting each other.
Bili smo priča političnemu in družbenemu nemiru. Ljudje se prepirajo med seboj, borijo drug proti drugemu.
Sadly, we have seen this even inside the church and in faith communities where people are shaking heads and kind of judging each other, and conflict has arisen.
Nažalost smo bili temu priča tudi znotraj verskih skupnosti, kjer so ljudje razpravljali, bili v konfliktu drug z drugim.
But not only that, we have seen disparities and inequalities.
Pa ne le to, videli smo in bili priča tudi neenakostim.
Perhaps not so much here in Slovenia, but in many parts of the world, we have seen how poverty and some racial groups have been discriminated against even during this pandemic.
Morda ne toliko tukaj v Sloveniji, ampak v nekaterih delih sveta smo videli, kako so določene družbene skupine doživele diskriminacijo v tej pandemiji.
There has been a lot of racial fighting and disparities happening in many parts of the world.
V številnih delih sveta je bilo veliko rasnih sporov in neenakosti.
And we also have seen how conflict and violence has taken place even more during this pandemic.
Prav tako pa smo videli tudi in bili priča konfliktom in nasilju v tej pandemiji.
Not just here near us where we are, with real wars like Russia, whether they're going to invade Ukraine. I'm not talking about just that kind of war.
Ampak ne govorimo o konfliktih, kot smo jim sedaj priča oziroma razmišljamo o Rusiji in Ukrajini, kaj se bo tam zgodilo.
But I'm talking about the violence that happens sometimes inside the homes.
Pa govorimo o nasilju, ki se včasih dogaja znotraj domov.
During the beginning of this pandemic, we've had parents staying home, people locked in, and there has been an increase of domestic violence.
V času te pandemije, ko je prišlo do lockdowna, do zaprtja, torej so starši ostali doma, delali od doma, vsi so bili naenkrat doma in prišlo je do porasta nasilja.
So that's why I say that the pandemic has revealed how broken this world is.
Zato pravim, da je pandemija razkrila, kako zlomljen je pravzaprav ta svet.
Far from God's ideal of that perfect, happy world that He created.
Daleč od Božjega ideala, srečnega sveta, ki ga je ustvaril.
And some consequences of all these things we see clearly in the mental health of us.
In nekatere posledice vsega tega vidimo v našem mentalnem zdravju.
We have seen an increase in depression, anxiety.
Videli smo porast depresije in anksioznosti, tesnobnosti.
Loneliness more than ever has crept up. Suicide ideation.
Osamljenosti, samomorov.
And we have seen, as I mentioned, trauma, violence, as well as addictions. People going to addictions.
Priče tudi travmi in pa odvisnosti.
Just as an example, I'll share with you some information from research done in America, but you can kind of think about that in your region here.
Kot primer bom z vami podelila nekaj podatkov iz raziskav narejenih v Združenih državah, ampak podobno je verjetno tudi tukaj.
Even before the pandemic, there was already an epidemic of loneliness.
Že pred samo pandemijo je prišlo do epidemije osamljenosti.
There was a meta-analysis review done, that is like when the researchers come together and they look at various research talking about loneliness.
Bila je narejena meta-analiza, torej trenutek, ko iz različnih raziskav potegnejo podatke in si ogledajo določeno temo.
And they looked at perceived isolation or loneliness, as well as what we call it objective social isolation.
In ogledovali so si rezultate, ki so povezani z osamljenostjo, kot jo ljudje doživljajo, in pa objektivno osamljenostjo.
Objective isolation is when people feel they are alone. They can objectively see, I'm only myself, like me. I was in my house, locked in, there's nobody there for several months.
Torej, ljudje doživljamo tako, kot je bilo v mojem primeru, recimo jaz sem bila nekaj mesecev v svojem domu, v svoji hiši in šlo je za moje doživljanje izolacije in osamljenosti.
So during this pandemic, many people were there, maybe one person or two isolated from others, feeling isolated.
V času pandemije smo imeli ljudi, ki so bili izolirani drug od drugega.
But there is subjective isolation.
Obstaja tudi druga vrsta izolacije.
Subjective isolation is when you may have people around you, but you still feel lonely.
Subjektivna izolacija in to je takrat, ko imate okrog sebe ljudi, pa se vendarle počutite osamljene.
And so we have seen that this epidemic of loneliness uses both. There are people that even when they have others around them, they still feel isolated and lonely.
In videli smo, da so v času pandemije ljudje bili osamljeni v obeh teh vidikih. Tudi če so bili okrog njih ljudi, so bili osamljeni.
And the research has pointed out that both perceived isolation and objective isolation increase mortality rates, just like smoking and obesity increase.
In raziskave so dokazale, da tako subjektivna kot objektivna osamljenost povečujeta stopnjo smrtnosti, enako kot recimo kajenje ali prekomerna telesna teža.
And this is true not only with women and men, but it's across genders, across age groups.
To velja za oba spola, velja za vse starostne skupine.
And they looked at various countries, not just US.
Ogledovali so si v teh raziskavah različne dežele, ne samo ZDA.
And so they have seen that social deficits are really more predictive of death in people with an average age younger than 65 years old.
In kar so videli je, da je smrtnost bolj predvidljiva v starostnih skupinah, ki so mlajše od 56 let.
So when they really looked at the numbers, they said the harm of isolation or loneliness is, in this study, was the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
In ko so vzeli podrobnolet podatke, so videli, da je učinek osamljenosti na smrtnost enak, kot da bi pokadili dnevno 15 cigaret.
So it is something that sometimes we don't talk about.
Gre za nekaj, o čemer ne govorimo pogosto.
But it's something that if we are concerned with living well and living long, we must be mindful of.
Ampak je to nekaj, česar se moramo zavedati, če želimo dobro življenje in pa dolgoživost.
So the brokenness has increased.
Ta zlomljenost, ranjenost sveta se je povečala.
And we have seen, as I said, abuse, adverse experiences.
Videli smo in bili priča zlorabam, okoliščinam, kjer je prišlo do nasprotovanj.
This increases even more the feeling of isolation when we go through that.
To še bolj povečuje občutek osamljenosti in izoliranosti od drugih.
We have seen children observing fighting and abuse among parents, witnessing that.
Otroci so bili priča konfliktom in zlorabam, ki so se dogajale med starši.
And all those behaviors lead to dysfunctional homes.
In vsa ta vedenja so pripeljala do disfunkcionalnih družin,
Attachment issues.
do težav pri povezovanju.
And it also promotes low self-esteem.
In prav tako do tega, da je stopnja samospoštovanja padla še niže.
And all of these are risk factors for addictions.
In vse to so dejavniki, ki vodijo k odvisnosti.
In other words, to deal with the emotional pain, the loneliness, people reach for alcohol, for substances, for pornography or video games, anything
Torej, da bi
to help
se
them deal with that.
ljudje soočili z bremenom te osamljenosti, so segali po alkoholu, po različnih drogah, pornografiji, videoigricah, po čemerkoli pravzaprav.
And during this pandemic, we saw that many people have done studies showing how the increase of stress, of loneliness has led to some of those behaviors.
In različne raziskave so pokazale, kako je vse to vedenje in povečanje stresa pripeljalo do težav, o katerih smo govorili.
In one study done nationally in the United States, they looked at 600 young people.
V eni od raziskav so vzeli pod drobnogled 600 mladih,
The ages were 13 to 18.
starosti 13 do 18 let.
And it was done in January of last year.
In raziskava je bila narejena januarja lani.
And they had seen that there was an increased, 78% of the young people felt COVID increased their stress.
In ugotovili, da 78% mladih v tej starostni skupini meni, da je COVID povečal stopnjo stresa v njihovem
Not
življenju.
just for them, but their families too.
Ne le za njih, ampak tudi njihove družine.
And 69% reported they were feeling loneliness.
In 69% je poročalo o tem, da se čutijo osamljene.
In other words, they really were having some of the same feelings, almost 7 in every 10 people, young people.
Torej, skoraj 7 od 10 mladih ljudi je poročalo o takšnih občutkih.
And 1 in 4, 25%,
Torej 25%
were accessing more substances
je
to deal with that.
dostopalo do različnih substanc, da se je soočalo s temi izzivi.
And the World Health Organization and many of the health professionals are seeing that this influence will be seen in the years to come.
In Svetovna zdravstvena organizacija in seveda številne druge organizacije poročajo o tem, da bomo učinke tega videli tudi v prihodnosti.
These impacts are going to be seen in the next few years in regard to the mental health of our young people.
Učinek tega bo viden v mentalnem zdravju naših mladih v letih, ki prihajajo.
Here a few other studies looking at another one here, particularly in America, showing that 75% of young people 18 to 25 were experiencing depression or substance use.
V eni od raziskav imamo podatek, torej, da 75% mladih med 18 in 25 letom ima simptome depresije in zlorabe različnih substanc.
So the question is, what are we going to be doing about it?
Vprašanje je, kaj bomo glede tega ukrenili.
What can we do as a church, as people of God, to help young people or adults who will be struggling and are struggling right now?
Kaj lahko naredimo kot cerkev, da bi pomagali mladim in odraslim, ki se borijo s temi izzivi in se bodo borili z njimi v prihodnje?
I wanted to see, I know we are in a group here, and I wanted to see if you could actually talk to the person next to you right now and just share a couple of words. What do you think can be done to help in this setting?
In zdaj lahko spregovorimo z osebo, ki sedi z nami, mogoče samo nekaj besed, 2-3 besede o tem, kaj mislimo, da lahko ukrenemo glede tega, kako se lahko odzovemo na to.
Very few things, just practical. What can be done? Just a couple of minutes.
Čisto praktične stvari, samo 2 minuti časa za ta pogovor. Kaj menite, da bi lahko naredili? 2 ali 3 osebe skupaj se pogovorite o tem.
Okay. Come close to somebody if you're by yourself.
Bodite blizu nekoga, pogovorite se z osebo, ki je zraven vas.
What can we do to help people who are struggling with mental health, particularly young people?
Kaj lahko naredimo, da bi pomagali ljudem, ki se borijo z mentalnim zdravjem, še posebej mladim?
Okay, maybe just a few more seconds.
Še nekaj sekund samo.
Let's see what are some ideas that you came up with.
In zdaj bi radi slišali, kaj so ideje, do katerih ste prišli.
All right. Can we start on this side here maybe?
Lahko začnemo tukaj na naši desni strani, mogoče kakšna ideja.
What are some ideas that you have come up with, that you discuss? What can we do?
Kakšna ideja, o kateri ste se pogovarjali
In this area here?
v tem krogu tukaj, v tem
Anyone?
delu?
Tule je bilo rečeno, da na delovnem mestu njemu tako prihajajo ljudje, ki imajo težave, da je upanje z revijami in jih spodbuja k temu, da torej lahko se zanašajo na višjo silo. V času, ko je vse zaprto, je nekako rečeno, se lahko mogoče preko otrok, vzgojiteljev, šol poskuša spodbuditi tako in sredstva javnega obveščanja bi tu moralo biti tudi obveščevanje. Četrta stvar je bila pa narava.
Okay. Oh, so a couple of things from what I can hear here. You are trying to offer support, maybe directly through psychiatry, like counseling or something directly? Is that?
Torej, podpora skozi direktno svetovanje, pomoč, ki se lahko nudi.
And also maybe you were also trying to get them to go to nature for nature walks. Is that what I heard?
Ravno tako spodbuda na koncu, kot je bilo rečeno, torej preživljanje časa v naravi, sprehodi.
Is that what you were saying? Okay,
Je
excellent.
to tisto? V
Excellent
redu,
ideas.
super.
Very good. How about this area here? Any ideas?
Tu področje tukaj.
he said groups like funders include young people and other groups like cooking or whatever for the other generations. Then maybe some activities doing with health or something, things like that. And now we learn we could provide some kind of coaching like examples we give.
Oh, okay.
Okay, nekaj predlogov, samo da povem v slovenščini, torej je bilo delo skozi različne skupine, kot so stezasledci, skrb za zdravje, recimo zdravstvene skupine, ali pa podpora v obliki coachinga, o katerem smo govorili minuli konec tedna v Marušici.
Okay, excellent. And these are great ideas because you're talking about bringing people together in a group, in a safe place to engage them.
In to so dobre ideje, zato ker govorimo o tem, da ljudje pridejo skupaj v skupino na nekem varnem kraju in da so vključeni med seboj.
Okay. Any ideas from this group here?
Kakšna ideja iz te skupine tukaj? Ne?
Nothing new, different than they said?
Nič novega, nič drugačnega.
Okay, I see a hand.
Ena od stvari, to je, da v času Covida, ko je bilo mogoče najtežje in ko so se te stvari pojavljale, je hči dala idejo za na spletni strani Instagrama narediti stran in v okviru tega objavljati razne pozitivne misli, razne pesmi, ki mogoče ni nujno, da so duhovne, z pozitivno vsebino, kjer ni preklinjanja. Kaj še? Predlogi dobrih filmov, glasbe in v tem stilu. Pomoč recimo ponujena, če nekdo potrebuje kakšno pomoč.
Excellent. Very good, because this is one thing where young people are. They are on social media,
Torej,
right?
mladi so na družbenih omrežjih.
And if you have some of those positive messages and that comes across, that can make a big difference to attract their attention as well.
In če imate pozitivne sporočila, seveda jih dosežejo in zbudijo pozornost.
Thank you.
Hvala.
Thank you. How about this group here? Any other ideas?
Tu skupina, še kakšna nova ideja?
I know we have your youth leader here.
Ja, imamo vodjo mladih
He must have some
konferenci.
ideas.
Zagotovo z idejami.
Pri nas smo govorili o tem, da veliko mladih enostavno se želi, da rečemo, odcepiti od realnega sveta in zato poseže po različnih substancah. Bilo je rečeno, da morajo sami začutiti potrebo po spremembi, ker jih ne moremo prisiliti, da bi se spremenili. Hkrati smo premišljevali o tem, da v resnici se lahko tudi cilji zmanjšajo na manjše korake in potem dosegajo lažje to pot boljših izbir v življenju. Hkrati smo se pa tudi nekako dotaknili ideje, da obstajajo dvojna merila, torej v naši cerkvi in pa tudi izven cerkve. Namreč družba od zunaj ne vidi težav oziroma celo jih združuje, naprimer kakšna substanca, torej če piješ, imaš družbo. In na ta način si lahko imel družbo tudi sredi Covida, ne skrivaj.
One thing reinforces the other. Yeah. So trying to see how we can draw people who are needing help to realize that they need help and to reach out for help. That's something that is important to do, right? Because we cannot force people to get help or to share what they're going or even to seek help.
Torej, pomembno je, da pomagamo ljudem, da vidijo, da potrebujejo pomoč, ker jih ne moremo prisiliti v to, da jo iščejo, ampak da razumejo, da jim je ta seveda tudi na razpolago.
So one of the things that perhaps we can start doing, it is helping to normalize mental health issues so people don't think that they are weird or different that this is something that's normal that many people struggle with.
Ena od stvari, ki jih lahko naredimo, je ta, da začnemo te mentalne izzive ali pa izzive mentalnega zdravja nekako normalizirati, da ljudje spoznajo, da niso čudni, če imajo težave na tem področju, ampak da se tudi drugi soočajo s tem.
There are many myths and many misconceptions and stigmas around mental health.
Okrog mentalnega zdravja obstaja veliko mitov in stigmatiziranja in seveda tudi napačnih stvari.
Here are some of them.
Tukaj so nekatere od teh stvari naštete.
There are some people that think that it's just a hormone issue, an endogenous problem, there is no cure, nothing you can do. All you can do is take medication for life.
Nekateri ljudje so prepričani, da gre za neko vrsto hormonskega neravnovesja, torej da potrebujete zdravila in da boste jih jemali do konca svojega življenja.
That is a myth, because while it is true that there are hormones involved, it is a real disease, there are still some things you can do to feel better and to get better, and there is a cure.
To je mit, čeprav seveda drži, da so vključeni tudi hormoni in da bodo včasih tudi potrebna zdravila, vendar le veliko stvari, ki jih lahko naredimo, da se počutimo bolje in da bolje živimo.
Other people think that it's laziness. Why don't they just do something about it and just, think that the people just don't want to get better?
Drugi ljudje mislijo, da gre preprosto za neko vrsto lenobe, torej zakaj nekaj ne naredijo, zakaj se nečesa ne lotijo, da bi jim bilo boljše.
And that's not true, because it is a real disease, it's not just laziness.
In to seveda ni res, zato ker je to resnična bolezen, ne gre za lenobo.
Other people think there's no need for medical treatment. You just do the new start and everything is going to be fine.
Potem spet imamo tretje, ki mislijo, da ni nobene potrebe po nobenih zdravilih, samo 8 naravnih zdravnikov uporabite in vse bo okej.
And while it is true that the new start principles help, that is not the only way that people get help. Sometimes people need medication and need medical treatment.
Čeprav seveda drži, da načela, ki so povzeta v teh 8 naravnih zdravnikih, kot jih rečemo, pomagajo, da so koristna, vendar le pride tudi do situacij, ko ljudje potrebujejo zdravniško pomoč in zdravila.
Other people think that it's a lack of prayer and that if they were just praying more, they would not be depressed or sad or anxious.
Nekateri mislijo, da je vzrok za to pomankanje molitve, ker če bi več molili, potem ne bi čutili tesnobe in pa imeli težav.
They think it's a lack of faith, maybe a spiritual problem, and that's why they're feeling depressed.
Da gre za pomankanje vere, za neko duhovno težavo.
And while there is a link between our faith and prayer is helpful, believing in God is helpful, even then treatment is also important because it is a real disease.
In seveda obstaja povezava z našo vero, z Bogom, ki nam lahko pomaga, ki koristi, ampak vendarle je potrebno tudi zdravljenje.
In fact, there are many people of faith in the Bible that have struggled with depression and suicide even.
V Svetem pismu imamo opisanih veliko ljudi vere, ki so imeli težavo z depresijo in z samomorilne misli.
This is Chris, a friend that I met some
To
years
je
ago.
Chris, prijatelj, ki sem ga srečala.
He was an elder in his church and he was a social worker.
Bil je starešina v svoji cerkvi in pa socialni delavec.
He actually helped victims of domestic violence. He had a history of that and he became a counselor and helped many families.
Pomagal je žrtvam nasilja v družini in veliko je bilo takšnih primerov.
One day I was going through a list of messages and I saw that he had taken his life.
Nekaj dni sem šla skozi svoja sporočila in videla novico, da si je vzel življenje.
I couldn't believe it. He was a faithful man, a man of prayer, filled with love for God and for mission.
Nisem mogla verjeti temu. Bil je človek vere, človek misije, poln ljubezni za Boga in delovanja.
But he had always had struggled with mental health issues.
Ampak že od nekdaj je imel težave na tem področju, torej boril se s stvarmi povezanimi z mentalnim zdravjem.
He had treatment, but on and off he was not taking the medication appropriately.
Dobival je zdravila, ampak ni jih jemal tako, kot bi bilo potrebno.
He was happily married.
Bil je srečno poročen.
But there came one day when the pain was so much, the emotional pain, that he resolved to take his life.
Ampak prišel je dan, ko je ta čustvena bolečina bila tako velika, da se je odločil vzeti si življenje.
But he was not alone.
Ampak ni bil sam.
The Bible talks about Job.
Sveto pismo govori o Jobu.
And Job had also had many, many losses.
Job je prav tako utrpel številne izgube.
And Job describes the kind of emotional pain he felt when he was going through that illness. He had lost everyone he loved, everything.
In opisuje bolečino, ki jo je doživel takrat, ko je izgubil vse.
He said in Job 30:16-17, "My life ebbs away."
V Jobu 30. poglavju 16-17 vrstici beremo o tem, kako čuti, da življenje odteka od njega.
Days of suffering grip me.
Da ga dnevi trpljenja držijo v pesti.
The night pierces my bones.
Da mu noč prebada kosti.
My gunning pains never rest.
In da se te bolečine, ki ga mučijo, nikoli ne končajo.
Of course we know the story of Job.
Seveda poznamo Jobovo zgodbo.
In the end he found peace in God and through his friends, and he found healing, and he was okay at the end.
Na koncu je našel mir v Bogu, našel je zdravitev in vse je bilo dobro.
But he was not alone. In 1 Kings we see the story of Elijah.
Ampak ni bil edini. V Prvi kraljevi vidimo zgodbo Elije.
It says there in 1 Kings 19:4
v Prvi kraljev 19:4
that while Elijah himself went a day's journey into the desert.
Da je Elija potoval za dan hoda v puščavo.
He came to a broom tree and he sat down under it and prayed that he might die.
Sedel je pod drevo in molil, da bi umrl.
He said, I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors.
Dovolj mi je, Gospod, vzemi moje življenje, nisem nič boljši od svojih prednikov.
Here's a powerful, faith-filled man of God who was asking that he wanted to die.
Imamo mogočnega človeka vere, ki prosi Boga, da bi umrl.
Struggling with those feelings.
Bori se s temi občutki.
But he was not alone.
Tudi on ni bil edini.
There was the story of Jonah too.
Imamo Jono.
Jonah 4:3, he said, "No, O Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live."
Jona 4:3 beremo, Gospod, vzemi moje življenje, kajti bolje mi umreti, kot da živim.
There was hopelessness that he felt.
Čutil je brezup.
Now, of course, God came, talked to him, just like he did with Elisha, talked to him, gave him food, comforted him.
Bog je seveda spregovoril z njim, ga potolažil, dal mu tisto, kar je bilo potrebno, enako kot pri Eliju.
And God patiently helped them find a new way of thinking and to get away from that circumstance.
In Bog jim je potrpežljivo pomagal do novega načina razmišljanja in tega, da zapustijo te okoliščine.
But we also see David.
Prav tako vidimo Davida.
David in book of Psalm 42:3 and 5.
David v 42. psalmu v 3. in 5. vrstici.
He was there putting out what he was feeling after so many losses in his life.
Izliva pred Bogom to, kar je čutil po tolikih izgubah v svojem življenju.
He said, "My tears have been my food day and night."
Moje solze so mi postale kruh po dnevi in po noči, pravi.
While men saying to me all day long, "Where is your God?"
Ko mi ves dan govorijo, kje je tvoj Bog?
Why are you downcast, O my soul?
Zakaj si malodušna, moja duša?
Why are you so disturbed within me?
Zakaj si potrta in se vznemirjaš v meni?
So David too felt those moments where he was feeling downcast.
Tudi
sad.
David je čutil te trenutke potrtosti, žalosti.
And then came Jeremiah.
In potem imamo Jeremija.
In the book of Lamentations 3, Jeremiah is talking about how isolated he was and the anguish in his soul.
In v Žalostinkah, 3. poglavju, govori Jeremija o tem, kako izoliran, osamljen je.
You might remember the story. He had been placed down in a dungeon by the king who didn't want to hear his counsel.
Verjetno se spominjate, da ga je kralj, ki ni želel slišati njegovega nasveta, vrgel v ječo.
And he wrote in Lamentations 3:17-18.
In v Žalostinkah 3:17 in 18 piše:
I have been deprived of peace.
Moja duša je Evropa na miru.
I have forgotten what prosperity is.
Pozabil sem, kaj je sreča.
So I say, my splendor is gone and all that I had hoped from the Lord.
Dejal sem torej, izginila je moja večnost ali moj smoter in upanje, ki je od Gospoda.
This book is full of some of those feelings that Jeremiah is pouring out to God with sadness and anguish in his soul.
In ta knjiga je prepolna občutkov, ki jih Jeremija izliva v žalosti.
But it's not only in the Old Testament that we see this.
Ampak tega ne vidimo samo v stari zavezi.
In the New Testament we see Paul also struggling.
V novi zavezi vidimo apostola Pavla, ki se ravno tako bori.
And 2 Corinthians, he's writing to the Corinthians in the chapter 1, verse 8 to 10.
In 2 Korinčanom 1, 8 do 10 piše cerkvi v Korintu.
And he was describing what they were going through to them.
Opisuje, kaj se dogaja.
He said, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about the hardships we suffered in the province of Asia.
Nočemo namreč, bratje, da bi vi ne vedeli za našo stisko, ki nas je zadela v Aziji.
We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life.
Čez mero in čez naše moči nas je obtežila, tako da smo obupali celo nad življenjem.
So there were those moments in Paul's life that he was reflecting all the pressures, every persecution, all the diversity and stress. And he too came to be desperate, even unto his life.
Torej v Pavlovem življenju so bili trenutki, ko mu je bilo težko, ko je bil obupan in vse to je poznal, vse to je doživljal.
Now we do know that many times in all these instances God was close. They were talking to God about their feelings.
In tisto, kar vemo, je, da so ti ljudje v takšnih trenutkih, da jim je Bog bil blizu in da so mu govorili o svojih občutkih.
And they found hope that there was a way out.
In našli so upanje, da obstaja izhod.
So the beautiful news about mental health and issues of despair and anguish is that there is always hope.
Čudovita novica povezana z mentalnim zdravjem in težavami, ki izhajajo iz tega, je, da je vedno upanje.
And that God understands.
In da Bog razume.
And he says here in 2 Corinthians 4, 16 to 18.
2 Korinčanom 4, 16 do 18 pravi.
Therefore we do not lose heart.
Zato ne omagujemo.
Though outwardly we were wasting away,
nasprotno, čeprav naš zunanji človek razpada,
yet inwardly we were being renewed day by day.
Se naš notranji iz dneva v dan obnavlja.
For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all.
Naša trenutna lahka stiska nam namreč pripravlja čez vso mero težko večno bogatstvo slave.
And he does give us a clue of one of the elements that are critical for hope.
In Pavel nam tukaj daje namig za enega od elementov, ki so ključni za upanje.
He says, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen,
ker se ne oziramo na to, kar se vidi,
but on what is unseen.
Ampak na to, kar se ne vidi.
Since what is seen is temporary, but what's unseen is eternal.
Kar se namreč vidi je začasno, kar pa se ne vidi je večno.
This kind of mindset can help someone to see hope and light at the end of the tunnel.
Takšen način razmišljanja lahko človeku pomaga, da vidi luč na koncu predora.
Of course, along with that, sometimes people will also need to get treatment, to get counseling.
Seveda bodo ljudje včasih tudi ob tem potrebovali zdravljenje, svetovanje.
But the point here is that there is hope and there is a way out.
Ampak tisto, kar je bistveno sporočilo, je, da je upanje in da obstaja izhod.
In fact, I will tell you, even Jesus himself felt despair.
Lahko vam povem, da je tudi Jezus sam čutil obup.
He had a sense of abandonment from God that was so deep that he felt critical despair down in his soul.
Imel je občutek, da ga je Bog zapustil, tako globok občutek, da je bil tako rekoč obupan.
And in Matthew 26:38, he said to his disciples.
Mateju 26:38 pravi svojim
He
učencem.
was in the Gethsemane and three of the closest friends were nearby, supposedly praying for him and with him.
Bil je v vrtu Getsemani in trije njegovi najbližji učenci so mu bili blizu, naj bi molili zanj.
And he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death.
In on jim je rekel, moja duša je žalostna do smrti.
So these deep feelings of anguish and despair can lead someone to feel like dying.
Torej, ti občutki obupa, nemira, ki v človeku lahko nekoga pripeljejo do točke, da čuti, kakor da umira.
Emotional and mental disorders do not discriminate.
Emocionalne in mentalne težave ne delajo razlike med ljudmi.
It does not discriminate by age. It can happen to any age group.
Ne po starosti, lahko se zgodi katerikoli starostni skupini.
Does not discriminate on race. It happens in all races.
Niti po rasi, dogaja se to v vseh rasah.
No national origin.
Ni razlike po nacionalnosti.
No matter what language you speak.
Ne glede na to, kateri jezik govorite.
No matter if you're religious or not.
Ni važno, ali ste verni ali niste.
Anyone can suffer from emotional and mental health issues.
Vsakdo lahko trpi zaradi težav povezanih z emocionalnim, čustvenim in mentalnim zdravjem.
And in a study done some years ago by Baylor University,
v raziskavi, ki je bila narejena na Univerzi Baylor,
it says that the people with emotional challenges and their families, when they were part of a church community,
so prišli do ugotovitve, da ljudje, ki imajo emocionalne težave in težave z mentalnim zdravjem, če so del verske skupnosti,
if they were struggling with mental health or emotional disorders, many times they felt unseen in their churches.
če so se in ko so se s tem borili, so čutili, kot da so nevidni v svoji cerkvi.
Many times they were less involved in what the church was doing.
Bili so manj vključeni v to, kar se dogaja v cerkvi.
But they felt, according to this study, that they would love to see someone and provide assistance to them in the church.
Toda želeli si, da bi jim nekdo znotraj cerkve ponudil pomoč.
But usually the church neglected the needs that they had.
Toda običajno je cerkev zanemarila potrebe, ki so jih imeli.
And so this help that church can provide for people with depression, with anxiety, can be so critical in connecting them with what they need at the moment that they need.
In zato je pomoč, ki jo cerkev lahko ponudi ljudem z depresijo in tesnobo, tako ključnega pomena.
In fact, another survey showed that 40%, in this case it was done in America, that people that were seeking mental health help, they were talking first to their priests, to their pastors, before they talk to the psychiatrist or to the psychologist.
Še ena zanimiva raziskava je, da ko so ljudje čutili težave glede svojih izzivov na področju mentalnega zdravja, so se v 40% najprej obrnili k duhovnikom, pastorjem, preden so šli k psihologom in psihiatrom.
In fact, in this study, twice as many people said that they would talk first to their pastor before they would talk to a psychiatrist.
Torej, v tej raziskavi je dvakrat več ljudi reklo, da so najprej govorili s svojim pastorjem, preden so šli k psihiatru.
And so there's a great opportunity here for faith leaders, for other youth pastors or youth leaders to be able to connect with those that are struggling and open that door.
In zato je tukaj velika priložnost, tako za pastorje, vodje mladih kot druge, da se povežejo s temi ljudmi in odprejo vrata za rešitev.
Unfortunately, many times when they seek help, there's not appropriate help available.
Nažalost pa velikokrat, ko iščejo pomoč, ni prave pomoči na voljo.
In fact, in this study, those that were, for instance, hospitalized because of their mental illness, they received less visits than people that had physical problems that were hospitalized.
Prav tako je recimo bilo opazno, da ljudje, ki so bili hospitalizirani zaradi mentalnega zdravja, so prejeli manj obiskov kot ljudje, ki so bili zaradi drugih zdravstvenih težav.
Many times when you go to a hospital with a physical problem, surgery, there are people that come, bring you cards, give you food.
Ko greste v bolnico zaradi, neke operacije, drugih težav, pridejo ljudje na obisk, vam kaj prinesejo.
But if they are hospitalized with a mental illness or mental issue, nobody goes visit. There's no food, nobody brings anything.
Toda, če so hospitalizirani zaradi mentalnih težav, ni obiskov, nihče nič ne prinese.
And so it is that, like, this is a lady. She had cancer, she had visits in the hospital, notes and cards.
To je ena gospa, ki je imela raka, bila je v bolnici, dobivala je obiske, spodbudna sporočila.
People brought food for her family, they were praying for her.
Ljudje so prinesli hrano njeni družini, molili so zanjo.
She even received support during her treatments.
Prejela je podporo in prejemala je podporo v času zdravljenja.
And when she finished, she came to church, everybody welcomed her her back.
In ko se je to končalo, se je vrnila nazaj in vsi so jo sprejeli z dobrodošlico.
But when she had a mental illness,
Ko pa je imela mentalne težave,
she said she did not receive any visits in the hospital.
je rekla, da ni dobila nobenih obiskov,
No notes, no cards,
nobenih spodbudnih sporočil,
no meals for her family.
nič obrokov za družino,
Nobody came to pray for her and
nihče
with
ni
her.
prišel moliti za njo ali za njo.
And when she came back to church, nobody spoke with her. They didn't know what to say.
In ko se je vrnila nazaj v cerkev, se niso ljudje pogovarjali z njo, ker niso vedeli, kaj naj rečejo.
Now, that doesn't happen here, I'm sure, right?
Prepričana sem, da se to tu ne dogaja, drži?
Usually, it's something that is the reality. People feel uneasy about mental health or mental issues.
Običajno je to resničnost. Ljudje se počutijo nelagodno, ko gre za mentalno
So
zdravje.
how can the church help?
Kako lahko cerkev pomaga?
You suggested some very good things as you were sharing
Vi ste
here earlier.
predlagali že nekaj zelo dobrih stvari, ko ste podelili to, o čemer ste govorili.
I wanted to suggest first we need to educate people and help demystify, destigmatize mental health.
Tisto, kar želim dodati še jaz, je prvo, da moramo o tem govoriti, izobraževati ljudi in odzeti stigmo tej temi.
Through education, we can help people see that a mental issue, anxiety, depression, is just like a disease, like cardiovascular disease or diabetes.
Skozi izobraževanje namreč lahko pokažemo ljudem, da so mentalne težave enako bolezen, kot so kardiovaskularne težave in bolezni.
The only difference is that the organ that has the disease is the brain,
Edina razlika je v tem, da je organ, ki je bolan, v tem primeru so možgani.
whereas the cardiovascular disease is the heart.
Pri kardiovaskularnih boleznih je to srce.
So education is very important, and we as church should do more in educating people about mental and emotional disorders.
Torej, izobraževanje je zelo pomembno in mi bi morali narediti več, da kot cerkev izobrazimo ljudi o mentalnih in drugih izzivih.
We do a great job talking about diet and nutrition and New Start.
Zelo veliko naredimo in dobro opravimo delo, ko govorimo o prehrani, o 8 naravnih zdravnikih.
But over the last few years, we have seen a great need to do more in the area of mental and emotional health.
V zadnjih nekaj letih pa smo videli potrebo, da naredimo več na področju emocionalnega in pa mentalnega zdravja.
Another thing we can do is have a commitment to care and reach out to everybody who's struggling.
Naslednja stvar, ki jo lahko naredimo, je, da smo predani temu, da dosežemo ljudi, ki se borijo s temi izzivi.
So through social media, as you said, or through one-on-one offering of counseling, or through talking to the young people, even if they don't want to talk to you.
Kot smo rekli, skozi družbena omrežja s pozitivnimi sporočili, odnosi 1 na 1 ali pogovorom z mladimi, tudi če ne želijo še pogovora.
Creating a safe space for people to share without fear that they will be judged for their spirituality.
Torej, preprosto, da ustvarimo varen prostor, kjer ljudje lahko podelijo to, kar se dogaja, ne da bi pri tem bili obsojeni.
And then providing a welcome to those that have any issues that seem to be on the margins.
In ravno tako, da smo odprti in da sprejemamo ljudi, ki imajo izzive, pa se nahajajo nekje na margini, na robu.
Show that we care, show support for individuals and families.
Da pokažemo, da nam je mar, da ponudimo podporo posameznikom in družinam.
But not just that, we can also advocate for their needs.
Ne le to, ampak mi lahko tudi zagovarjamo njihove potrebe, smo zagovorniki teh potreb.
And then provide that spiritual support, just like Jesus did.
In ponudimo duhovno podporo, enako kot je to naredil Jezus.
You know, the Seventh-day Adventist Church for more than 100 years has been concerned and talking about the importance of mental health.
Adventistična cerkev več kot 100 let že govori o pomembnosti mentalnega zdravja.
In fact, Ellen White had mentioned this a lot.
Pravzaprav je Ellen White veliko pisala o tem.
She has said in 1905, and that's more than 100 years ago,
Leta 1905, torej več kot 100 let nazaj,
the condition of the mind has a much greater impact than it is generally believed.
Je rekla, da stanje uma ima veliko večji vpliv, kot pa se to nasplošno prepoznava.
She said many illnesses are the result of depression.
Veliko bolezni, pravi, je posledica depresije.
So not just a result of the food they eat, the lack of exercise, it's a result of depression.
Ne samo hrane, ki jo človek je ali ne je, pomanjkanja gibanja, ampak rezultat depresije.
And she says here, sorrow, anxiety, frustration,
In govori o žalosti, o tesnobi, o frustraciji,
remorse, guilt, and difficulties with trust.
o obžalovanju, o krivdi in težavah pri zaupanju.
All of these things undermine our vital forces
Vse te stvari spodkopavajo naše življenjske moči
and invite decay and death.
in vabijo v naše življenje propad in smrt.
So she recognized that we need to pay attention to what's happening in people's brains, in all of these issues that it was named here. We need to also include that when we talk about health.
Prepoznala je, da moramo posvetiti pozornost temu, kaj se dogaja v mislih ljudi.
And then she talks a little bit about some things that can help.
In potem govori o nekaterih stvarih, ki lahko pomagajo.
Courage, hope,
Pogum,
faith,
upanje, vera,
trust, and love.
zaupanje in ljubezen.
All of this promotes health and prolongs life.
Vse to izboljšuje zdravje in podaljšuje življenje.
So helping people find faith and trust and love in the way we deal with them can make a big difference.
Torej, če ljudem pomagamo najti vse te stvari v naših odnosih z njimi, je to lahko pomembna razlika.
Helping them to find hope and find contentment because that will bring health to the body and strength. to
Če jim
the soul.
pomagamo najti upanje in zadovoljstvo, to prinaša dober učinek za zdravje.
So is there hope?
Je torej upanje?
What do you think? We just shared some things. Is
Kaj
there hope?
mislite? Ali obstaja upanje, da nekaj naredimo?
What would be the answer to loneliness, uncertainty, brokenness, and mental illness?
Kakšen bi bil odgovor na osamljenost, negotovost, zlomljenost, mentalne bolezni?
Well, we just introduced some of the things, but in the next, after the break, we'll talk about God's prescription for mental disorders.
Pokazali smo nekoliko stvari, ampak po odmoru bomo govorili o Božjem zdravilu za te težave.
So before we go in a break, I wish that you can share with the person next to you something.
Preden gremo na odmor, želim, da z osebo, ki je poleg vas, nekaj podelite.
Out of all, everything you just heard,
Iz vsega tega, kar ste ravno kar slišali,
what is one thing that was valuable to you?
kaj je ena stvar, ki vam je bila dragocena? Katera stvar? Torej, samo ena stvar, ki
Just a
vam je bila
couple of
dragocena.
minutes.
Samo 2 minuti časa, da podelite drug z drugim.
Okay, you had a chance to share something?
Torej, upam, da ste imeli priložnost kaj podeliti.
Does anyone wants to share for everybody to hear what was most valuable to you?
Želi kdo to, kar je povedal, podeliti z vsemi nami? Kaj je bilo najbolj dragoceno?
Mislim, da je najbolj vesel, da sploh govorimo o tej tematiki, ker to je tema, o kateri se v cerkvenih krogih ne govorimo in se je izogibamo.
That is so true.
Da, to je tako res, drži.
Just the fact that your leaders thought it would be important that we talk about this today is already a blessing, right?
Samo to, da so torej vodje v cerkvi prepoznali potrebo, da bo dobro govoriti o tem, je že blagoslov.
Because in fact, many times we just ignore, oh, we don't need to talk about this. And this is a space now that you can bring this up. So that's a great
Ker veliko krat to preprosto ignoriramo. Ampak zdaj je prostor, da o tem spregovorimo.
Thank you. Anyone
Hvala.
else? What
Še
was
kdo?
valuable to you?
Kaj je dragocenega od tega, kar ste slišali?
Yes, Vesta.
For me, it was very valuable because it said that the people from Bible suffer. I know that, I read that, but I was not aware of that.
Torej,
So when I got in,
Yes.
zelo dragoceno je bilo že to spoznanje ali pa spomniti se znova na to, da so ljudje v Svetem pismu trpeli zaradi teh stvari. Torej, brali smo o tem, ampak nekako to mogoče ostane v ozadju naših misli.
That's right. Thank you.
Hvala.
Sometimes we forget
Včasih pozabimo, na
just
to.
like people of faith can also suffer from
Da lahko
some
tudi verni ljudje trpijo za določenimi stvarmi.
Even Jesus felt
Tudi
his heart
Jezus je čutil težave,
brokenness to death.
njegovo zlomljeno srce.
Thank you. So let's go
Hvala.
ahead and take a break and take about 10 minutes to stretch a little bit, chat, go to the restroom. We'll be back at 4:15 to continue on.
10 minut odmora, torej ob 4:15 smo znova tukaj in nadaljujemo.
Now, when we talk about these mental health issues, we must realize there are 3 levels.
Ko govorimo o vprašanjih povezanih z mentalnim zdravjem, se moramo zavedati, da obstajajo 3 nivoji.
And mental health is impacted both by individuals, but also impacted by community and government.
In na mentalno zdravje vplivajo tako posamezniki, kot tudi skupnosti in tudi vlade.
And there are many things we can do in the individual level, but also in the community level and in government level.
So stvari, ki jih lahko naredimo na našem osebnem nivoju, ravno tako pa tudi na nivoju skupnosti in na nivoju oblasti.
One of the things that has been happening is that we are becoming more aware of mental illness.
Ena od stvari, ki se dogaja, je ta, da se vedno bolj zavedamo vprašanj povezanih z mentalnim zdravjem.
We are right now going through the Winter Olympics.
Zdaj ravno smo v času olimpijskih iger, zimskih olimpijskih iger.
And I heard that some Slovenians got the gold medal today.
In slišala sem, da so danes nekateri Slovenci dobili
I
medalje.
also heard they got a gold medal yesterday. There is a
Včeraj je zlata, danes srebrna in
So
bronasta.
congratulations. Now, I don't know if you know this guy. Do you know Michael Phelps?
Ali poznate tega človeka, to je Michael Phelps.
So he is an Olympian from the other Summer Olympics.
On je olimpijec iz poletnih olimpijskih
For
iger.
many years, he's got tons of gold medals.
In več let je osvajal zlato medaljo za zlato medaljo.
But do you know, he suffered from mental illness.
Ampak on se je boril z mentalno boleznijo.
And the last year, especially a few years back, he started to raise awareness and talk about his issues.
In nekaj let nazaj je začel govoriti o tem, o svojih bojih in s tem seveda dvigovati prepoznavnost in zavedanje o tem.
Do you know this Olympian?
Tudi to je olimpika,
Naomi Osaka.
Naomi Osaka,
She's a tennis player from Japan.
tenisačica z Japonske.
And you might have read what happened during the Summer Olympics.
In morda ste brali o tem, kaj se je zgodilo v času poletnih
refused-
olimpijskih iger.
She refused to talk to reporters because of her mental health. That really brought a lot of
Ni se
pressure.
želela pogovarjati z novinarji zaradi svojega mentalnega zdravja in vprašanj, ki jih je imela v zvezi
And
s
she
tem.
was very
Borila se.
open about her depression.
Bila je zelo odprta glede svoje depresije.
And do you know Simone Biles?
Simone Biles,
A gymnast from the US.
gimnastičarka iz Združenih držav Amerike.
Last year during the Summer Olympics, she had a problem, and almost fell.
Lani v času poletnih olimpijskih iger je imela težave
And you might remember she refused to continue with her team.
in morda se spomnite, da ni nadaljevala iger skupaj s svojo ekipo.
And she talked about her stress and the mental condition that she was going through.
In govorila je o svojem stresu, o mentalnih izzivih, skozi katere je šla.
These athletes have done a lot to kind of raise awareness and lower the stigma on mental health among young people.
Ti atleti so naredili veliko, da je ta tematika stopila v ospredje in da se je zmanjšala stigma, ki je povezana z njo.
Now, when we talk about mental illness, there are many types of mental illness.
Ko govorimo o mentalnih boleznih, teh je seveda veliko.
There are those types of mental illness that is easy to recognize.
Obstajajo tiste, ki jih je lahko prepoznati.
For instance, autism or schizophrenia. There are some behaviors and symptoms you can easily see sometimes and identify.
Naprimer pri avtizmu, šizofreniji vidite simptome, ki jih zlahka povežete z boleznijo sam.
There are also bipolar disorders, OCD or obsessive compulsive disorders. There's some patterns you can notice.
Ravno tako pri bipolarni moti ali obsesivno-kompulzivni motnji.
But others are not easy to spot.
Drugih pa ni tako enostavno prepoznati.
Just like we were talking about depression, anxiety or even suicide, Many people don't even know the person is struggling with that.
Ko smo govorili o recimo depresiji, anksioznosti ali samomorilnosti, veliko ljudi sploh ne ve, da se oseba s tem bori.
There are some symptoms, but many times you can sit in church, smile at people, go back home, nobody knows that you are struggling.
Obstajajo seveda simptomi, ampak lahko se zgodi, da sedite poleg takšne osebe v cerkvi, greste domov in sploh ne veste, da se bori s tem.
And so that's why it's important that we start talking about it and normalizing and showing what symptoms are related to these experiences.
In zato je tako pomembno, da o tem govorimo, da pokažemo, kateri simptomi so povezani s temi izkušnjami.
So for instance, depression.
Če vzamemo za primer depresijo.
Here are some of the 9 common symptoms of depression.
Tukaj imamo 9 pogostih simptomov depresije.
People who are depressed, they will usually have at least 4 or more symptoms of these.
Ljudje, ki so depresivni, običajno imajo vsaj 4 ali več od teh simptomov.
Ideally, and we have a psychiatrist here, I don't know how it is here in Slovenia, but in America normally we would say 5 of this or more would help to diagnose a major depression.
Ne vem, kako je v Sloveniji, ampak v Ameriki bi rekli, da 5 od teh 9 simptomov so znak resne depresije.
And 2 of them that are very common. One is very deep sadness.
2 zelo pogosta, globoka žalost.
A sadness that many times doesn't have any explanation.
Žalost, ki nima neke razlage.
Or apathy.
Ali pa apatija, brezvoljnost.
Like a lack of pleasure that they usually would have, now they don't anymore for several weeks.
Pomanjkanje veselja, ki so ga prej imeli, zdaj pa ga nekaj tednov recimo niže.
This would be those fun things they used to like to do. Maybe they like to play soccer, sports, or maybe they like to cook or sing in the choir, but now they no longer like and enjoy those things.
Recimo v povezavi s stvarmi, ki so jih radi počeli, igrali nogomet, kuhali, peli v zboru, v tem so uživali ljudje, zdaj pa naenkrat ne.
Another symptom is fatigue, tiredness. They cannot explain why they're so tired.
Še en simptom je utrujenost. Ne morejo pojasniti, zakaj so tako utrujeni.
Lack of energy.
Manjka energije.
And another one may be sleep disturbance.
Potem motnje spanja.
They either sleep too much, too many hours, or don't sleep. They have insomnia.
Ali spijo preveč, ali pa trpijo za nespečnostjo.
Many of them may have weight changes.
Pri mnogih se dogajajo skoki v telesni teži.
Sometimes, they use food and so they end up eating more and then gaining weight.
Včasih uporabijo hrano za tolažbo, jejo več in seveda pridobivajo telesno težo.
But other times they will not feel hungry and eat less and they lose weight.
Spet drugič pa ne čutijo lakote, jejo manj in izgubljajo telesno težo.
Another one that's very common is lack of concentration.
Še en zelo pogost simptom je pomanjkanje koncentracije ali težave s koncentracijo.
Sometimes, they want to study if they're a young person and trying to, but they can't concentrate.
Če gre za mlade, želijo se učiti, ampak ne morejo se zbrati, ne morejo se koncentrirati.
In fact, they want to pray, they want to read the Bible, but their mind just can't get through. They have to read the passage over and over again and they get distracted.
Želijo brati Sveto pismo, moliti, ampak ko da ne more prodreti v to, kar berejo, morajo vedno znova ponavljati.
Another one is restlessness. They are restless.
Še en simptom je nemir.
Sometimes, they move very fast, they talk fast, they, instead of a normal, you can see what's happening. They are so restless.
Torej, včasih se zelo hitro gibljajo, veliko govorijo hitro in vidite, da se nekaj dogaja, ves ta nemir v njih.
But on the other people also feel more of a slowness.
Spet drugi pa čutijo upočasnjenost.
Sometimes they walk slower and talk slower. That can also be
počasi, govorijo počasi.
Suicidal thoughts.
Samomorilne misli, misli o smrti.
So they may dream about it, they start talking and thinking about it, just having ideas on how they would end their life.
Morda sanjajo o tem, razmišljajo o tem, govorijo o tem, kako bi končali svoje življenje.
And one that's very common is low self-worth.
In zelo pogost simptom je nizko samospoštovanje.
So because of many things that might have happened to them, they don't feel worthy of living.
Zaradi številnih stvari, ki so se jim zgodile, kot da čutijo, da niso vredni, da živijo.
Deep inside, they don't feel valuable and that they are contributing anything.
Globoko v sebi ne čutijo, da so dragoceni, čutijo, da ničesar ne prispevajo.
So these are some of the common symptoms that many times we see with somebody with major depression.
To so nekateri od pogostih simptomov, ki jih vidimo pri osebah z depresijo.
And normally we see people that have 2 to 4 of these, they may have what we call subsyndromal depression.
Ljudje, ki imajo od 2 do 4 simptome, pravimo, da imajo subsindromsko depresijo.
In other words, they may not have a major depression, but maybe they're getting there. And so we have to pay attention.
Torej, ne gre za razvito obliko depresije, ampak so na poti tja in zato je treba biti pozoren.
Now, normally to diagnose major depression, these symptoms need to be present at least for 2 weeks, every day, non-stop.
Da bi prišli do diagnoze depresije, morajo ti simptomi biti navzoči vsaj 2 tedna, ves čas.
So it's not like one day you wake up, you're feeling sad and you don't feel like you feel tired. But then the next day you wake up and you're feeling better and that's gone.
Torej, ne gre za to, da se nekega dne zbudite in ste pač utrujeni, nimate volje, naslednji dan pa je vse drugače.
All of us have moments and days that we wake up and we're not feeling our best.
Vsi mi imamo trenutke in dneve, ko se ne počutimo najbolje.
So here we're talking about consistent symptoms that are there every day, all the time, for at least 2 weeks or longer.
Torej, tukaj govorimo o stvarih, ki so navzoče ves dan, ves čas, vsaj 2 tedna.
Now, there are many root causes that can create those issues that we saw, those symptoms.
Obstaja veliko razlogov, ki lahko povzročijo te simptome, ki smo jih videli.
Certainly, genetics is one of them.
Genetika je zagotovo eden od njih.
There is a higher probability that if somebody in your family, your parents, your grandparents, had some mental illness, depending on the mental illness, you might genetically be predisposed to that.
Seveda obstaja večja verjetnost, če je nekdo v vaši družini imel mentalne težave, da jih boste imeli tudi vi.
That does not mean that just because they had it, you will have it.
To ne pomeni, da zato, ker je nekdo imel mentalne težave, jih boste zagotovo imeli tudi vi.
But that's one of the risk factors.
Ampak to je eden od dejavnikov tveganja.
What we know is that the brain chemistry is not balanced. There's some neurotransmitters or hormones in the brain that are not really stable.
Prav tako vemo, da je razlog za to neuravnoteženost v kemiji naših možganov, torej v hormonih, ki so v možganih.
And so the brain chemistry plays a role.
In zato tudi to igra vlogo.
Also, there are hormonal changes that can create and increase the risk for that, for depression.
Hormonske spremembe ravno tako lahko povečajo tveganje za depresijo.
We know, for instance, the people that are hypothyroid, they have a higher risk for depression.
Vemo, da ljudje, ki imajo težavo z povečano torej ščitnico, imajo več verjetnosti za depresijo.
There are also some other things like medicines that can increase the risk.
Prav tako obstajajo določena zdravila, ki lahko povečajo tveganje.
Or even some medical conditions like diabetes.
Ali pa določena zdravstvena stanja, kot je na primer diabetes, sladkorna bolezen.
And another one is very important, it's poor lifestyle choices.
Zelo pomemben dejavnik so tudi slabe odločitve povezane z življenjskim slogom.
For instance, if people don't sleep well, that can be a symptom, but can also be a root cause.
Če ljudje na primer dobro in dovolj ne spijo, to je lahko simptom, lahko pa je tudi vzrok.
If they don't eat a healthy diet that has all the nutrients, that can be a root cause. Maybe they're not having enough omega-3s or tryptophan or something like that.
Če ne uživajo dovolj zdrave hrane, je to lahko vzrok.
Maybe they're not exercising enough. Exercise, we know, a lack of it is a root cause, but exercising helps to reduce
Morda
some
ne
symptoms.
telovadijo dovolj, se ne gibljajo dovolj, tudi to je lahko razlog.
We know that grief and loss is a major factor.
Prav tako vemo, da žalost in pa izguba nekoga v življenju je pomemben dejavnik.
So when people are grieving, they have many of the symptoms of depression, and they now can actually have experienced depression, for a period of time until that grief goes through.
Ko ljudje žalujejo, lahko doživijo določene simptome depresije.
Other kinds of chronic stress and traumatic experiences, abuse, can also be directly linked as a root cause.
Kronični stres in travmatične izkušnje so lahko neposreden vzrok depresije.
And I would say the thinking patterns that people have is also very important because it affects brain chemistry.
Prav tako so zelo pomembni vzorci razmišljanja, ki jih ljudje imajo, zato ker ti vplivajo na kemijo naših možganov.
So I wanted to discuss with you, based on the symptoms and the root causes, what is God's prescription
Zato
for
bi
better
rada
mental
z
health?
vami spregovorila o tem, kaj je recimo na podlagi teh simptomov in razlogov božji recept za to.
As it turns out, God's prescription is actually evidence-based as well.
Kot se seveda izpostavi, lahko vidimo, da so ti božji predpisi tisti, ki temeljijo na dokazih.
God's prescription treats the cause, the root cause of some of those issues that we just discussed.
Božji recept se ukvarja z nekaterimi od vzrokov, temeljnih vzrokov, o katerih smo ravnokar govorili.
So one of the first things that we can do is really look at the lifestyle factors.
Ena od prvih stvari, ki jih lahko naredimo, je seveda, da pogledamo na dejavnike našega življenjskega sloga.
Is the person exercising or not? Are they, in fresh air? Are they eating well, sleeping as they should?
Ali se oseba dovolj giblje, je na svežem zraku, ima hrano, ki jo potrebuje, dovolj spi, sončna svetloba.
Are they exposed to sunlight?
Torej, ali so izpostavljeni sončni svetlobi?
All of these things can be very helpful, especially in the case of mild depression.
Vse te stvari so lahko zelo koristne, še posebej pri blagih oblikah depresije.
We have seen, for instance, studies showing that exercise, having regular exercise, compared to another group that is taking antidepressants, those two groups did well in the case of mild depression, just the same.
Recimo raziskave so pokazale, da ljudje, ki telovadijo, ki se gibljejo, dosežejo pri blagih oblikah depresije enako učinek kot tisti, ki jemljejo antidepresive.
This in some cases of mild depression.
Torej, v nekaterih primerih blagih oblik depresije.
So some of these things can be very helpful in trying to reduce some of the symptoms.
Nekatere od teh stvari so torej lahko zelo koristne, ko poskušamo zmanjšati simptome.
The problem is that when somebody has major depression, they don't have the energy to exercise.
Težava je seveda, ko nekdo zboli za težjo obliko depresije, da nima volje za to, da bi
The
se gibal.
fatigue is so deep that they can't get out of bed to cook something.
To malodušje je tako močno, da niti nimajo volje, da bi vstali iz postelje in nekaj pripravili si za
And
jesti.
so it is that also we have to evaluate, sometimes there is a need for medication.
In zato moramo oceniti in prepoznati, da včasih obstaja potreba po zdravilih.
Because the medication can stabilize some of those brain chemistry that are off, and then maybe they will start to have energy to exercise.
Zato, ker zdravila lahko pomagajo pri tem, da pride do ravnovesja v kemičnih substancah v naših možganih in potem se stvari lahko izboljšujejo.
So we believe medication is also sometimes appropriate, especially with major depression.
Zato seveda verjamemo, da so zdravila primeren odziv, še posebej, ko gre za težje oblike depresije.
Now, another area of God's prescription has to do with improving our brain function.
Drugo področje tega božjega recepta je, da izboljšamo delovanje naših možganov.
Many times people who are struggling with depression, they might have developed some addictions.
Ljudje, ki se borijo z depresijo, lahko v določenih primerih razvijajo določene oblike odvisnosti.
And addictions just make the depression worse.
In odvisnosti depresijo še poslabšajo.
For instance, if they're drinking alcohol, or if they're looking at pornography, or if they are just engaged in addictions, that impacts their frontal lobe.
Recimo uživanje alkohola, pornografija ali katerekoli druga oblika odvisnosti vpliva na sprednji reže njihovih možganov.
That messes up their pleasure centers in the brain, the neurotransmitters.
In to vpliva na neurotransmiterje, ki so povezani z občutkom ugodja, užitka.
And it just makes the depression even worse.
In poslabša depresijo.
So helping people deal with their addictions is part of the treatment of depression.
Zato, če pomagamo ljudem, da se soočijo s svojimi odvisnostmi, je to del zdravljenja depresije.
Another thing that helps to improve the brain function in this case is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Druga stvar, recimo, ki tukaj pomaga, je kognitivno-behavioralna, torej vedenska terapija.
This is a type of counseling that helps people deal with experiences that they might have had in childhood and reframe those experiences with a different light.
In to je terapija, ki ljudem pomaga soočiti se z izkušnjami, ki so jih imeli recimo v svojem otroštvu in jih doživeti oziroma dojeti, videti v drugačni luči.
This therapy helps them to focus on their thinking about what happens to them and to reframe that so they can behave and feel differently.
Ta terapija jim pomaga, da se soočijo s svojim načinom razmišljanja o tem, kar se je zgodilo in da o tem razmišljajo drugače.
And as in turn, that also many times helps to improve their emotional intelligence.
In kot se je pokazalo, to velikokrat izboljša tudi njihovo čustveno inteligenco.
People that tend to be anxious or have depression, many times their emotional intelligence is not very good.
Ljudje z močno tesnobnostjo ali pa depresijo nimajo ravno dobre čustvene inteligence.
It's hard for them to manage their emotions and to relate to people.
Težko jim je upravljati z njihovimi čustvi in biti v enem dobrem odnosu z ljudmi.
And that impacts the chemistry in their brain.
In to vpliva znova na kemijo njihovih možganov.
So these are some of the things that we can help or people can get help for breaking addictions, having some therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, and trying to improve their emotional intelligence.
In to so nekatere stvari, ki lahko pomagajo ljudem pri soočanju z depresijo.
And then comes the other piece that's very important as well.
In potem pridemo še do ene stvari, ki je zelo pomembna.
As they're working through their lifestyle, maybe having medications, improving their brain function.
Ko se ljudje ukvarjajo s svojim življenjskim slogom, morda jemljajo zdravila, razmišljajo in se učijo razmišljati.
Then comes the support they can get from God as well along the way.
Potem pridemo do podpore, ki jo lahko dobijo od Boga na tej poti.
And also the support they can have from loved ones.
In ravno tako podpore ljubljenih oseb.
So, prayer, worship, Bible study sometimes can be helpful, keeping in mind that some of this may be difficult for people with major depression because of lack of concentration.
Molitev, proučevanje Svetega pisma, vse to je lahko koristno pri ljudeh z depresijo.
And another thing that's very critical here is that as they come close to God and accept God's forgiveness, it's important to work through forgiveness of others as well as forgiveness of themselves.
Še ena zelo pomembna stvar je, da spoznajo, doživijo, izkusijo Božje odpuščanje in tudi odpuščanje v medsebojnih odnosih.
Remember what Ellen White said about remorse and guilt all being linked to depression and disease and death?
Se spomnite, kaj je Ellen White rekla o obžalovanju, o žalosti, o krivdi, o vsem tem, kako je to povezano z boleznijo in smrtjo?
We have found that sometimes the root cause of the depression and sadness comes from unforgiveness of some circumstance in their life.
Vidimo, da včasih je tisti temeljni razlog za depresijo težava, ker ni prišlo do odpuščanja v življenju.
Maybe it's hard for them to forgive themselves because of something they did.
Morda si ljudje težko odpustijo nekaj, kar so naredili.
Maybe it's hard for them to forgive someone else for something that someone else did to them.
Morda težko odpustijo nekomu drugemu, kar je nekdo drug njim naredil.
And so working through the process of forgiveness can be part of this important treatment.
In zato je, ko gremo skozi proces odpuščanja, lahko to pomemben vidik zdravljenja.
And as a result of that, they can also work through healing of the bitterness that they may be carrying.
Posledično se lahko soočijo tudi z zagrenjenostjo, ki jo nosijo v sebi.
All of us sometimes have experiences in childhood that we take on to our adult life.
Vsi mi smo doživeli kakšno izkušnjo v otroštvu, ki smo jo prenesli v odraslo življenje.
And these experiences have been noted to actually impact our mental health and our physical health when we are adults.
In te izkušnje vplivajo, dokazano vplivajo na naše življenje, ko smo odrasli.
And if we carry pain from those early childhood experiences without dealing with them, it will impact our physical and mental health.
In če nosimo bolečino iz teh izkušenj v otroštvu, to zagotovo vpliva na naše mentalno zdravje.
So part of God's prescription is that we deal with that.
Zato je del tega Božjega recepta ta, da se s tem ukvarjamo.
If we are carrying bitterness, that we release and heal from that.
če nosimo v sebi zagrenjenost, da se je osvobodimo.
And that we cultivate gratitude instead.
In da namesto tega negujemo hvaležnost.
So gratitude has been directly linked with better mental health, and it's one of the habits that we can develop.
Hvaležnost je neposredno povezana z dobrim mentalnim zdravjem in gre za eno od navad, ki jih lahko oblikujemo.
There are studies that have shown that when you make a list of things you're grateful for, just by doing that, you already have better well-being scores.
Raziskave kažejo, da že samo to, če naredimo seznam stvari, za katere smo hvaležni, dosegamo boljše rezultate, ko gre za oceno našega mentalnega zdravja.
And so it is that as we think about this, I want just to spend a few more minutes talking a little bit about the emotional intelligence piece.
In ko govorimo o tem, bi rada še nekaj minut uporabila za to, da govorimo o tistem delčku, ki se nanaša na čustveno inteligenco.
Here is a picture that I really love.
Tukaj je slika, ki mi je zelo všeč.
I took this picture some years ago.
To sliko sem posnela nekaj let nazaj.
I was visiting women in the country of Burundi in Africa.
Obiskala sem ženske v Burundiju, v Afriki.
This was after they suffered over 15 years of civil war.
To je bilo potem, ko so preživele več kot 15-letno državljansko vojno.
Most of these women had lost their husbands and their sons to war.
Večina teh žensk je izgubila svoje može in svoje sinove zaradi vojne.
Most of them only had 1 or 2 pairs of shoes to wear.
Večina teh je imela največ par ali 2 čevlja.
Most of them had to walk everywhere for miles to get to places.
Vsaka oziroma večina njih je morala po več kilometrov hoditi, da so kamorkoli prišle.
Many carrying heavy things in their head or their child in their back.
Mnoge so nosile bremena na svoji glavi ali pa otroka na hrbtu.
But what impacted me the most was to look at the smiles in their face.
Ampak to, kar je name naredilo največji vtis, je bil nasmeh na njihovem obrazu.
These women were truly happy.
Te ženske so bile resnično srečne.
And I was like, how can they go through all of this and still not feel depressed?
In jaz sem se spraševala, kako je možno, da so šle skozi vse to in da niso depresivne.
They felt trauma, many were abused sexually.
Doživele so travmo, številne so bile spolno zlorabljene.
Many of them didn't even know what they would eat the next day. They were poor.
Nekatere niti niso vedele, kaj bodo naslednji dan jedle, tako siromašne
They
so
had
bile.
lost loved ones.
Zgubile so ljubljene osebe,
But their attitude and their thinking was not in the loss.
toda njihova drža, njihova miselnost ni bila miselnost izgube.
They were very high in emotional intelligence.
Bile so zelo visoko v čustveni inteligenci.
How many have heard about emotional intelligence?
Ste slišali za čustveno inteligenco? Kdo je slišal? Ja, vidim.
So we have several types of intelligence.
Imamo različne vrste inteligence.
Now there are even more as the research continues.
Ko se raziskave nadaljujejo, prihajamo do novih spoznanj.
But the original first researchers on emotional intelligence, Travis Bradbury and Jane Greaves, talked about 3 types of the making of the whole person.
Ampak prvotna raziskovalca Travis Bradbury in Jane Greaves sta govorila o 3 vrstah inteligence.
They talked about the intellectual intelligence,
Torej o intelektualni inteligenci,
our personality,
naši osebnosti
and then our emotional intelligence.
in naši čustveni inteligenci.
And the fact that in order for us to be whole, we needed to have these 3 things well developed.
In da bi oseba bila celovita oziroma v celoti zdrava, moramo razvijati vsa ta 3 področja.
They wrote a book called Emotionally Intelligence 2.0.
Sorry, Dave.
Emotional Intelligence 2.0, the name of the book.
Svojo knjigo sta poimenovala Emocionalna inteligenca 2.0.
And they described what emotional intelligence does to keep us whole.
In opisujeta v tej knjigi, kaj emocionalna inteligenca pomeni za to, da ostanemo zdravi.
They describe the fact that, in our brain we have the stimulus coming to our frontal lobe, the cortex.
Opisovala sta in opisujeta to, da imamo dražljaje, ki prihajajo v naš sprednji reželj.
And that's how we absorb information from our experiences. It goes through the central lobe, the frontal lobe, the cortex.
In tako absorbiramo informacije, torej skozi naš čelni reženj.
And then from there, we have a connection with our limbic system.
Potem imamo povezavo z našim limbičnim sistemom.
And that makes us aware of the emotion we have in relationship to that evaluation of that
In
experience.
tukaj se začnemo zavedati čustev, ki jih imamo v povezavi z nekim dogodkom, z nekim dražljajem.
That has a connection to our hypothalamus in the brain.
V naših možganih je to povezano s
You can see
hipotalamusom.
here is the hypothalamus, here is the
tukaj.
frontal lobe.
Tukaj imamo čelni reženj,
The limbic
hipotalamus.
system includes the amygdala and other parts in our brain.
Limbični sistem vključuje amigdalo in druge dele.
And the hypothalamus over here, it is linked to many other parts, our endocrine system, immune system, somatic system, and autonomic system.
In hipotalamus je potem povezan z različnimi področji, torej avtonomnim sistemom, somatičnim, imunskim sistemom in endokrinalnim.
So we can see how our brain connects us to everything in our body and many of the hormones that impact our full body.
In tako pravzaprav vidimo, kako nas naši možgani povezujejo z vsem, kar je v našem telesu.
So emotional intelligence is really the path that we see between the feelings and the reasoning, the thinking of the brain.
In čustvena inteligenca je pravzaprav pot med občutki in razumom.
So in the human body, we have this frontal cortex, which is the seat of reason and thought.
V človeškem telesu imamo ta sprednji reženj, čelni reženj, ki je sedež razuma, misli.
We can call it the rational center of our body.
Lahko ga imenujemo racionalni center našega telesa.
And then we have this limbic system, which it's the emotional center of our body.
In potem imamo limbični sistem, ki je čustveni center telesa.
Now, this limbic system is very complex structure that lies besides, on the side of the thalamus, just under the cerebrum.
Ta limbični sistem je zelo zapleten in seveda občutljiv sistem.
So it includes the hypothalamus, the amygdala, it includes the hippocampus as
Vključuje
well,
hipotalamus,
and
amigdalo
many other nearby areas of the brain.
in druga področja možganov.
And it seems to be the primary focus of emotion, our emotional life, and has a lot to do with the formation of our memories as
In
well.
tukaj je primarni sedež naših čustev in povezan je zelo močno z našimi spomini.
So to have emotional intelligence, we require that we have effective communication between our limbic system, the emotional brain, and our rational system, which is in the frontal cortex.
Zato, da bi imeli razvito čustveno inteligenco, mora obstajati dobra komunikacija med torej limbičnim sistemom in pa našim razumskim sistemom oziroma čelnim režnjem.
When there's good communication between this thinking center and our emotions, we have high emotional intelligence.
In ko ta povezava je dobra, imamo visoko čustveno inteligenco.
And that helps us to be self-aware. In other words, we are aware of what we feel, what we experience.
In to nam pomaga do višjega samozavedanja, torej zavedamo se, kaj čutimo, kaj doživljamo.
And we are aware of how to manage the emotions and the feelings that we get
In
out
prav
of the
tako se
experiences.
tudi zavedamo, kako upravljamo z našimi čustvi.
That it has to do with us, ourselves.
Torej, to ima opravek z nami.
But emotional intelligence also impacts how we relate to others.
Emocionalna inteligenca pa seveda vpliva tudi na to, kako se vedemo do drugih.
So when we have high emotional intelligence, we are better able to be socially aware of what's happening where we are in the relationships in the room.
Visoka čustvena inteligenca pomaga do tega, da se bolje vedemo do drugih, da se zavedamo, kje smo v teh odnosih.
And we are able to relate and manage our relationships in a positive way.
In lahko na pozitiven način upravljamo z našimi odnosi.
There are some tests that you can do to measure your emotional intelligence.
Obstajajo testi, ki jih lahko naredite, s katerimi lahko izmerite svojo čustveno inteligenco.
And some of these tests and research done shows that men tend to score higher on self-awareness, to know what they're feeling.
In nekateri od teh testov kažejo, da moški dosegajo boljši rezultat pri samozavedanju, torej pri zavedanju, kaj čutijo.
And that women and men have, on average, the same kind of level of self-awareness, but men have higher on the self-management piece compared to women.
Da imajo ženske in moški približno enake rezultate na splošno, ampak moški dosegajo boljši rezultat pri samoupravljanju, se pravi upravljanju svojimi čustvi.
But women tend to have higher rates of social awareness in relationship management than men.
Ženske pa imajo višje rezultate pri socialnem, družbenem zavedanju in pa odnosu z drugimi ljudmi, upravljanju teh odnosov.
It's interesting that millennials, they have looked at millennials and Generation Y, baby boomers, they have the greatest gap on self-management.
Ugotovili so, da imajo milenici, ko so jih primerjali z generacijo Y, baby boomeri, torej največji razkorak na področju samoupravljanja, se pravi upravljanja samim sabo.
In other words, it's very hard to manage emotions and deal with those emotions. And that might be part of the reason why we have seen an increased symptoms of depression and, problems with emotional
Torej, da imajo
disorders.
velike težave pri upravljanju svojimi čustvi in zato je to morda eden od razlogov, zakaj smo videli porast depresij in drugih težav.
Now, here are some factors that impact emotional intelligence.
Nekaj dejavnikov, ki vplivajo na čustveno inteligenco.
Our experiences in childhood.
Naše izkušnje v otroštvu.
Many times we learn to manage emotions based on what our parents model for us.
Velikokrat se učimo upravljati svojimi čustvi na podlagi vzorov, ki jih vidimo pri naših starših.
Also, we have ideas of who we are based on the messages that we receive from parents.
Prav tako se naše ideje o nas oblikujejo na sporočilih, ki jih dobivamo od
And that
staršev.
can impact our emotional intelligence.
In to lahko vpliva na našo čustveno inteligenco.
For instance, if we have high levels of emotional support, we have higher emotional intelligence.
Če imamo
usually.
visoke stopnje čustvene podpore, potem je tudi naša čustvena inteligenca višja.
But when we have lower levels of support, we tend to have lower
Če pa je
emotional
stopnja
intelligence.
čustvene podpore nižja, je čustvena inteligenca nižja.
In terms of sleep is another factor.
Dejavnik je tudi spanec.
If we sleep well and are rested, we tend to manage our emotions better. It increases emotional
Če
intelligence.
spimo dobro in bolje, potem bolje upravljamo s svojimi čustvi.
But lack of sleep, when you're tired and stressed, is harder to manage your emotions. You get angry much faster. Have you noticed that?
Pomanjkanje spanca pa pripelje do tega, da težje upravljamo s čustvi. Verjetno ste opazili to.
As it turns out, poor nutrition also decreases emotional
Ravno
intelligence.
tako slaba prehrana znižuje
There has
čustveno
been some
inteligenco.
studies pointing out that people that tend to eat more sweets, not so much plant foods, they have oftentimes easier to lose their patience in some studies.
Različne raziskave kažejo povezavo, recimo, da tisti, ki jedo več sladkih stvari, manj rastlinske hrane, težje upravljajo svojimi čustvi.
And then, of course, illness. When people are sick and they don't have the energy even to think, that lowers their IQ.
In tudi bolezni znižujejo čustveno inteligenco, torej ko nimajo niti zmožnosti razmišljati.
But one of the major factors has to do with the beliefs that we have, the evaluation that we do of the experiences we have.
Ampak eden od glavnih dejavnikov so naša prepričanja, naše vrednotenje izkušenj in dogodkov.
Many of us have like a little conversation with ourselves. We call it a silent self-talk.
Številni med nami imajo tih pogovor sami s sabo, imenujemo ga torej tih samopogovor.
So this is like we talk to ourselves, okay, I woke up this morning, what am I going to wear? We're thinking, talking to ourselves.
Torej, to je tisto, ko se zjutraj zbudimo in se rečemo, ok, kaj bom danes oblekel, torej razmišljamo o stvareh.
Oh, my friend was supposed to call me, she didn't call me, oh, she didn't remember me.
Prijateljica me bi naj poklicala, ni me poklicala, torej pozabila je name.
Oh, my boss left me an email. Look how he talked to me. He doesn't care about me.
Šef mi je pustil email, glej kako govori z mano, ni mu mar za mene.
And we kind of think about that and talk to ourselves all day long about everything that happens.
In seveda na ta način se pogovarjamo sami sabo, seveda o stvarih, ki se nam dogajajo ves dan.
And those conversations are a major factor in either increasing or decreasing our EQ.
In ti pogovori so zelo pomemben dejavnik, bodisi pri zvišanju ali znižanju naše čustvene inteligence.
So, for instance, let me just show you here some things that we can see. Our feelings, they are a result of these messages, these silent talks.
Recimo, naša čustva so rezultat teh naših sporočil.
So in the end, it's not what happens to you that makes you feel a certain way. It's what you think about what happens to you that makes you feel a certain way.
Konec koncev ni tisto, kar se vam je zgodilo, kar pripelje do tega, kar čutite, ampak tisto, kar vi mislite o tem, kar se je zgodilo, vas pripelje do čutenja.
So when somebody has depression or major depression, sometimes they tend to have a negative kind of pattern of thought.
Ko nekdo ima depresijo, resno oblike depresije, potem beležimo negativen vzorec misli.
And that those negative thoughts made them feel even worse in their depression.
In te negativne misli prispevajo k temu, da se počutijo še slabše v svoji depresiji.
Even when good things happen, they twist it into negative things sometimes.
Tudi ko se zgodijo dobre stvari, jih včasih enostavno spremenijo v negativne.
So let's take an example here of somebody with very high EQ.
Vzemimo recimo primer nekoga z zelo visoko čustveno inteligenco.
We saw earlier that the Apostle Paul had moments that he felt like pain to death.
Videli smo prej recimo apostola Pavla, ki je imel trenutke, ko je čutil bolečino, zaradi katere bi umrl.
But at the same time, he had a high emotional intelligence.
Ampak istočasno je imel visoko čustveno inteligenco.
One of the stories in the Bible tells us that him and Silas had been put to prison. Do you remember that story?
Ena od zgodb opisanih v Svetem pismu nam pravi, da sta bila on in Sila vržena v ječo.
They actually had been beaten before.
Predtem so jo pretepli.
They were placed in the prison unjustly.
Po krivici so jo zaprli v zapor.
They were chained to their legs.
Uklenili so jima noge.
And they were crying in prison.
In ona dva sta jokala v tej ječi.
They were, Lord, why did you bring us here?
Ona dva sta govorila, Gospod, zakaj si dovolil, da
We
smo
are
tu?
so faithful. Why are we here, Lord?
Tako zvesta smo ti, zakaj smo
Is
tukaj?
this what they did?
Sta to
What
počela?
were they doing?
Kaj sta počela?
They were singing.
Pela sta, ja.
Why were they singing?
Zakaj sta pela?
The reality was very different of what they had experienced. Most people will be crying, right?
Večina ljudi bi zaradi tega jokala.
But instead of looking at what was happening, they were looking to, as he said, the unseen.
Toda namesto, da bi gledala na tisto, kar se dogaja, sta gledala na tisto, kar smo brali, kar se ne vidi.
They did not allow all those experiences to keep them from seeing what God could do.
Nista dovolila, da bi jim to, kar se je dogajalo, preprečilo videti tisto, kar Bog lahko naredi.
They kept thinking, if God wants to take us out of here, He will.
Razmišljala sta o tem, če naj Bog želi izpeljati od tukaj, naj jo bo.
They kept thinking, we are privileged because we are suffering like Jesus suffered.
Razmišljala sta, mi dva imamo privilegij, prednost, da trpimo, kot je trpel Jezus.
So in other words, they were thinking about their circumstance, an evaluation that was different, looking to the unseen, not to what was seen.
Torej, v svojih okoliščinah sta razmišljala drugače, razmišljala sta o tem, kar se ne vidi, ne na tisto, kar se vidi.
And as a result, they were happy, they were singing.
In posledica je bila, da sta pela.
So their feelings were not linked to the experience, it was linked to the thinking that they had.
Torej, njuna čustva niso bila povezana z izkušnjo, ampak z njunim razmišljanjem.
And as it is, our body does not react to reality, but to our perception of reality.
In dejstvo je, da se naše telo ne odziva na resničnost, ampak na naše dojemanje resničnosti.
There have been many stories along history about people who were resilient, who survived in unlikely situations.
V zgodovini beležimo številne zgodbe o ljudeh, ki so preživeli neverjetne okoliščine.
And that's because their mind was focused on the unseen.
In to zato, ker je njihov razum bil osredotočen na to, kar se ne vidi.
Now, how many of you have had nightmares?
Kdo med vami je imel nočne more?
Okay, I see several hands.
Vidim nekaj rok.
Did you ever wake up sweating after you had a nightmare? Maybe you were flying and then you fell and you wake up like...
Ali ste se kdaj zbudili, recimo potni, po taki mori?
Everybody's doing this.
Mogoče ste leteli in naenkrat...
Now, you are lying in bed flat.
Ležali ste v posteli, na hrbtu.
But your heart is racing and you're sweating.
Ampak vaše srce močno utripa in potite se.
Why is that?
Zakaj?
Because in your brain, your thoughts, you were seeing in your dream what was happening, and that thinking, that image made your body respond.
Ker vaše misli, torej vaše sanje so povzročile odziv vašega telesa.
So likewise, the thoughts that we have, like, being in the line of a roller coaster. If you're afraid of roller coasters, you're going to start feeling bad about it.
Torej, recimo, če vzamemo za primer vlakec smrti, če se ga bojite, se takoj začnete slabo počutiti glede tega.
Because you're like, oh, it's going to be awful. I'm going to fall from there. Oh.
Razmišljate, grozno bo, padel bomo tam.
So you start sweating, your heart starts racing.
Srce začne hitro utripati, potite se.
Because our thoughts are powerful and they have a powerful way to impact our body.
Naše misli so zelo močne in močno vplivajo na naše telo.
And that's why we cannot many times trust our feelings.
Zato velikokrat ne moremo zaupati svojim čustvom.
Many times we have irrational beliefs.
Velikokrat imamo iracionalna prepričanja.
Oh, I must experience this. I must buy that. I must do that. If I don't, it's horrible, it's terrible.
Moram doživeti to, moram kupiti ono. Če tega ne, potem bo nekaj groznega.
Some people say, I must get married. If I don't, I'm going to be happy on the rest of my life.
Nekateri ljudje pravijo, moram se poročiti, če ne bom nesrečen do konca svojega življenja.
Other people say, I must have a child. If I don't, I will be unhappy. It's terrible.
Spet drugi pravijo, moram imeti otroka, če ne, potem bom nesrečna.
And those demands that we place upon ourselves becomes part of our thinking and our feeling, our reality.
In te zahteve, ki si jih nalagamo, postanejo del našega razmišljanja, naše resničnosti.
They put demands on others.
Drugi zahtevajo stvari od drugih.
Oh, my wife has to be this way. She needs to cook this way. If she doesn't, it's terrible, it's horrible.
Drugi rečejo, recimo, moja žena mora biti takšna, mora kuhati tako, če ne, potem je grozno.
Oh, my husband needs to give me flowers. He needs to give me gifts. He must remember my anniversary. He doesn't love me.
Moj mož mora mi prinašati rože, mora se spomniti vseh obletnic, dajati mi darila, če ne, potem me ne ljubi.
Oh, my pastor, he should do this and this. If he doesn't, oh, I don't like it.
Ali pa moj pastor mora narediti to ali ono, če ne, potem grozen pastor.
And so it is that we put demands on other people. And if that doesn't happen, we start to feel bad because we want that.
In mi zahtevamo stvari od drugih ljudi, če te zahteve niso uresničene, se začnemo slabo počutiti.
We now look at the world during a pandemic.
Gledamo na svet v času pandemije.
And we say, oh, the government must do this. That person must do that. If they don't, it's horrible, it's terrible.
Vlada mora narediti to, ta oseba mora narediti tisto, če ne, potem grozno.
And the result is there are people that are living lives, anxious lives, depressed, unhappy lives.
In posledica je, da obstajajo ljudje, ki živijo nesrečno življenje, depresivno življenje, tesnobno.
And we say, if people don't change, if my husband, my wife, my son doesn't change, then it's terrible. I can't stand it.
In potem dodamo še to, če se moj mož, moja žena, otroci ne spremenijo, ne bom mogel živeti.
I'll be anxious, I'll be depressed.
Bom čutil tesnobo, depresijo.
All of us have at some level these kinds of distortions.
Vsi mi imamo v neki točki takšna razmišljanja, takšne popačenja.
Here are some examples of these distortions.
Tukaj imamo nekaj primerov.
I have no control over my feelings.
Nimam nadzora nad svojimi čustvi.
Is this true or false?
Je to res ali ne?
How many people think it's true? You
Kdo
cannot
misli, da je
control your
res, da ne
feelings.
moremo nadzorovati čustev?
Oh, nobody thinks. Good for
Nihče ne
you.
misli tako
How
dobro.
many people think it's false?
Kdo misli, da je ta trditev napačna?
Yes, because how do we control our feelings?
Ker kako nadzorujemo svoje čustva?
With our thinking, right? We
Z
just
našim
learned that.
razmišljanjem.
If we
O tem
think
smo govorili.
differently, we might feel differently.
Torej, če razmišljamo drugače, se tudi počutimo drugače.
Some people think I would never feel better.
Nekateri ljudje mislijo, nikoli se ne bom počutil bolje.
This word never is already an impossible word.
Ta beseda nikoli je pravzaprav nemogoča beseda.
Because people always at some point will feel better.
Ker ljudje se v neki točki bodo počutili bolje.
So that's a distortion.
Torej gre za popačenje resničnosti.
I will never get out of this situation.
Nikoli se ne bom izvil
That's
iz te
false.
situacije. To je napačno.
We always get out of situations.
Vedno izidemo iz nekih situacij.
Oh, I'm a failure because I failed my exam.
Ali pa jaz sem zguba, zato ker nisem naredil izpita.
I'm failure because my wife left me.
Jaz sem zguba, ker me je žena zapustila.
I'm a failure because I didn't get that job.
Zguba sem, ker nisem dobil službe.
And that is not true.
To pa ni res.
Oh, the situation is terrible, it's horrible.
Situacija je grozna,
You know,
grozljiva.
very few situations in the world are horrible.
Zelo redke okoliščine na tem svetu so res grozljive.
There are some,
So
but
nekatere,
many times we call terrible things that are not really that terrible.
toda veliko krat določene stvari imenujemo grozljive, pa niso takšne.
There's somebody that says, oh, I just know I will get cancer and die one day.
So ljudje, ki pravijo, vem, da bom dobil raka in bom umrl.
Well, that may be true. If you think so much, you might come to a reality.
Lahko se to zgodi, če toliko o tem razmišljaš in to postane resnično.
But that may not necessarily be true.
Ampak ne rabi biti nujno res to.
Now, this one is very common. This is not going to work.
To je zelo pogosta misel, to ne bo delovalo.
Sometimes you have a dream, a thought, God is placing a dream in your heart.
Včasih vam Bog daje neko misel, neke sanje v vaše srce
And some people say, no, it's not going to work.
in ljudje pravijo, ne, to ne bo šlo,
No, it's not going to work.
ne bo delovalo.
We never did that before.
Nikoli nismo tako to delali.
Maybe there comes a new idea by a leader, a pastor in the church, and the elder says, nah, it's not going to work.
Pride pastor z neko novo idejo, starešina reče, ne,
Never
ne bo
worked
šlo.
before.
Nikoli ni šlo
It's not
tako,
going to work.
tudi zdaj ne bo.
But the reality is, this is God's idea, it will work.
Toda dejstvo je, da je to lahko Božja misel in da bo delovalo.
So, unfortunately, we carry these kinds of distortions.
In zato nosimo vse te misli v sebi.
Mark Twain said, I have suffered a great many misfortunes in life, most of which never happened.
Mark Twain je rekel, da je v življenju doživel veliko nesrečnih stvari, večina od njih se ni nikoli zgodila.
So sometimes we are suffering for something that didn't happen and that will never happen, but we suffered as if it did.
Včasih trpimo zaradi nečesa, kar se ni zgodilo in se ne bo zgodilo, ampak mi trpimo.
And Carl Jung said, it all depends on how we look at things and not how things are in themselves.
Karl Jung pravi, da je vse odvisno od tega, kako mi gledamo na stvari in ne kakšne so stvari same po sebi.
And so it is that we have to be very careful on how our thinking is.
Zato moramo biti zelo pozorni na svoj način razmišljanja.
In one of my favorite books, Ministry of Healing, Ellen White says this.
V eni od mojih najbolj priljubljenih knjig, Zdravje na dosegu roke, Ellen White pravi to.
Disease is sometimes produced and is often greatly aggravated by our imagination.
Pravi, naša domišljija včasih pripelje do bolezni, pogosto pa jo zelo poslabša.
Many people are lifelong invalids who might be well if they only thought so.
Številni ljudje so doživljenjski invalidi, lahko pa bi bili zdravi, če bi o tem razmišljali.
Many people imagine that every slight exposure will cause illness.
Mnogi so prepričani, da bo vsaka stvar prinesla neko bolezen.
And the evil effect is produced because they expected that.
In slabi učinek se zgodi zato, ker je pričakovan.
And here comes something very serious.
In tukaj pridemo do nečesa zelo resnega.
She says many die from disease, the cause of which is wholly imaginary.
Pravi, mnogi umrejo zaradi bolezni, razlog katere je popolnoma domišljijski.
So here you can see the power of our thoughts.
Tukaj vidimo moč naših misli.
This is in science known as the placebo effect.
V znanosti je to znano kot placebo učinek.
If you take this pill of salt thinking it will cure you, it might cure you a little bit. That's because you're thinking it will.
Če vzameš to tableto, te bo to ozdravilo in v resnici lahko pride do neke delne ozdravitve, ker misliš, da te bo ozdravilo.
So that's why the studies have to be shown to be better than this effect, this placebo effect.
Zato raziskave morajo dokazati, da so boljše od tega placebo efekta.
Some people say, oh, I'm going to drink this tea. It's going to cure my COVID.
Nekateri ljudje mislijo, jaz bom spil ta čaj in čaj bo pozdravil moj COVID.
Maybe there's nothing in the tea that will cure COVID, but just thinking that it will have a little bit of a positive effect.
Mogoče v samem čaju ni ničesar, kar bi lahko povzročilo zdravitev, ampak samo razmišljanje o tem lahko pripelje do boljšega počutja.
So the idea is that our thoughts, if you expect something, many times that's what you will get. So we need to be careful about what we think.
Ideja je torej ta, da naše misli močno vplivajo na to, kar se zgodi. Zato moramo biti zelo pazljivi glede tega, kaj mislimo.
So Epictetus philosopher said that people are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them.
Epiktet pravi, da ljudje ne doživljajo negativnih stvari zaradi stvari, ampak zaradi njihovega pogleda na stvari.
And the Bible confirms that. King Solomon said, "For as he thinks in his heart, so is he."
In Svetopismo to tudi potrjuje, zato ker modri Salomon v pregovorih 23:7 pravi, da je človek takšen, kakor razmišlja, da je.
So when we are thinking about emotional intelligence and managing our emotions, we have to remember that many times our wishes, our unfulfilled preferences, they can only make us miserable if we really absorb the demands that we want.
In ko govorimo o našem razmišljanju, naši emocionalni inteligenci, se moramo zavedati tega, da nas lahko naše misli, naši občutki torej pripeljajo do tega, da se počutimo zelo slabo.
So in other words, we only going to be miserable if we put demands and shoulds and musts in our life.
Počutili se bomo pa slabo, če bomo zahteve, torej to moraš, to je treba narediti, sprejeli v svoje življenje.
But the fact that you don't get what you want doesn't necessarily cause you to be miserable.
Ampak če ne dobite tistega, kar si želite, to ne pomeni, da se morate bedno počutiti zaradi tega.
Is your demand of that makes you miserable?
Vaša zahteva potem, da bi to imeli, ta vas dela bedne pravzaprav.
In other words, you never need what you want. You only prefer it.
Torej, nikoli ne potrebujete tega, kar si želite, samo želite si to.
You don't need certain things to live, but you prefer that.
Določenih stvari ne potrebujete za življenje, si pa jih želite, dajte jim prednost.
And remember that unfulfilled preference will not make you miserable unless you demand it.
In če se to ne zgodi, se ne boste bedno počutili zaradi tega, razen če boste to zahtevali.
Some years ago I visited an elephant orphanage in Africa, in the city of, where was I? I was in Kenya actually.
Nekaj let nazaj sem obiskala sirotišnico za slone v Keniji.
And this elephant, as you can see, he is very sad.
In ta slon je, kot lahko vidite, zelo žalosten.
All these elephants lose their moms, you know, they're killed by the butchers to get the ivory, and so they come to this little orphanage from 3 months to a year old.
Vsi ti sloni so izgubili svoje matere, ubili so jih lovci, zato da bi dobili njihove okle, in oni pridejo v to sirotišnico v starosti od 3 mesecev do leta.
And there they are cared for, you know, they have, as you can see, the people give them milk,
Tam skrbijo za njih, dajo mleko,
food,
hrano.
but this little one was really sad.
Ampak ta malček je bil res žalosten.
And then the psychologist of the elephants, did you know elephants have psychologists?
Potem je psiholog za slone, ne vem, če ste vedeli, da imajo sloni
He
psihologe.
told us that this one was depressed
Nam je rekel, da je ta slon ima depresijo.
because, you know, he missed his mom and he would not eat, he would not play with the others.
Pogrešal je svojo mamo, ni jedel, ni se igral z drugimi.
And if he was not able to come out of that, he would die.
In
because
če
they
ne
think
bo
he died.
prišel iz tega stanja, bo umrl.
So, you know, if you looked at him and you looked at the healthy ones, you see a big difference.
In ko gledate nanj in na zdrave slone v primerjavi, vidite veliko razliko.
And the elephant psychologist said he needs to decide that he wants to live.
In ta psiholog za slone je rekel, da se mora ta slon odločiti, da želi živeti.
And it's interesting that this happens with elephants, but it's many times likewise with us.
Zanimivo je, da se to dogaja sloni, ampak velikokrat je podobno pri nas.
We have a much smarter brain in some ways than the elephant.
Mi imamo na različne načine veliko pametnejše možgane kot
We have
sloni.
rational thoughts.
Imamo racionalne, razumne misli.
And through those patterns of thinking, God can really use, His Spirit can really touch us so we can actually look at the world in a different light.
In po naših vzorcih razmišljanja lahko Sveti Duh doseže, da gledamo na svet na drugačen način.
This is what these women in Burundi did.
To so te ženske v Burundiju dosegle.
They were looking at their experiences in a different light.
Na svoje izkušnje so gledali v drugi luči.
And so, they were following what the Bible in Romans 12:2 says.
Sledile so temu, kar pravi svetopismo v Rimljanom 12:2.
There's a call that we should be transformed by changing the way we think.
Tukaj imamo zapisan poziv, da naj se preobražamo z načinom svojega razmišljanja.
And in Philippians 4:8 there is a recipe of what we need to think about.
In Filipljanom 4:8 je recept za to, o čemer bi naj razmišljali.
It says there, whatsoever things are true.
Stvari, ki so resnične.
Now note, it doesn't mean that you're going to make a believe, everything's positive. No, think about the things that are true.
Torej ne govori o tem, da moramo zdaj vse videti pozitivno, ne? Ampak stvari, ki so resnične.
Think about the things that are honest.
Kar je vzvišeno.
Things that are just.
Pravično.
If there's any virtue in it, think about it.
Kar je čistno ali krepostno.
If there is any praise, think about it.
Kar je hvale vredno, o tem razmišljajte.
In other words, focus our mind on the thoughts that will bring a positive outlook.
Z drugimi besedami, usmerite svoje misli tako, da bo učinek pozitiven.
Do you know this lady?
Poznate to žensko?
Corrie ten Boom. Have you heard of her?
Corrie ten Boom. Ste kdaj slišali za njo?
A few people have.
Ja, nekaj vas je
slišalo. There has been a movie made out of the story of her and her family many years ago.
Pred leti je bil posnet film o njeni zgodbi in zgodbi njene družine.
They were a Christian family living in Holland during the Second World War.
Bili so kristjani, ki so živeli na Nizozemskem v času druge svetovne vojne.
Her dad was a watchmaker in the Ten Boom jewelry store.
In njen oče je bil urar in delal je tudi v draguljarni.
Today, if you visit the city there of Haarlem in Holland, you will be able to visit her home.
Danes lahko v mestu Haarlem na Nizozemskem vidite ta njen dom.
They, during the Second World War, hid Jews in their home and let them out safely outside of Holland.
In v času druge svetovne vojne so v svojem domu skrivali Jude.
This is where they hid them behind a closet. They would stay there, and then, when they would come, they would be hidden. Nobody knew they were there.
Skrivali so jih za omaro, tam so bili skriti, ko je kdo prišel.
Until the day that somebody told them out, and the whole family was taken, and father killed, others died. And she and her sister went to this concentration camp.
Vse do trenutka, ko jih ni nekdo izdal, očeta so ubili, ona in njena sestra sta bile v koncentracijskem taborišču.
And the movie was called The Hiding Place.
Film pa je nosil naslov Skrivališče.
Beautiful story.
Čudovita zgodba o tem, kar se je zgodilo.
But what is beautiful is that in the end, although her sister died, Corrie ten Boom survived and came out alive.
Na koncu pa tisto, kar se je zgodilo, torej njena sestra je umrla, Corrie pa je preživela.
She traveled the world talking about forgiveness and talking about her experience and wrote many books.
Potovala je po svetu, govorila o odpuščanju, o svoji izkušnji, napisala več knjig.
And one thing she said, I really like, she says,
in ena od stvari, ki jih je rekla in so mi zelo všeč,
happiness isn't something that depends on our surroundings.
Sreča ni nekaj, kar je odvisno od naših okoliščin.
It is something we make inside ourselves.
Ampak je nekaj, kar ustvarimo v sebi.
Worrying doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrow.
Zaskrbljenost ne izprazni jutrišnji dan njegove skrbi.
It empties today of its strength.
Ampak izprazni današnji dan njegove moči.
So, like Corrie ten Boom, we can remember this.
Kot Corrie ten Boom se lahko tudi mi spominjamo tega.
How can we do that?
Kako lahko to naredimo?
I love this demonstration here that Ellen White says in the book Education.
Všeč mi je ta prispodoba, ki Ellen White uporablja v knjigi Vzgoja.
She says that water lily can be surrounded by slimy, dirty waters.
Govori o lokvanju, ki ga lahko obdaja blatna in umazana voda.
It can have weeds and dirt around it.
Okrog njega je lahko plevel, umazanija.
But despite of her poor conditions, you know what it does?
Ampak kljub slabemu stanju, veste, kaj naredi lokvan?
It strikes its stem down beneath the sand, the pure sand, beneath the waters.
Torej, pecelj spusti navzdol v pesek do čiste vode.
And there, from there, it draws life,
in od tam črpa življenje.
lifting up its fragrant blossoms in the light in spotless purity.
In tako odpira svoje dišeče cvetove v tej brezhibni lepoti.
What a perfume it produces from such an unlikely place.
Kakšno dišavo proizvede v
Isn't that
tako
beautiful?
nepričakovanem okolju. Ali ni lepa ta izjava?
I like to think of this, we are in this messed up world, broken world.
Jaz razmišljam o tem tako, smo v tem zlomljenem svetu.
There are many things that are unjust.
Svetu zmešnjav, veliko stvari je
There's
krivičnih.
disease, death, all the things we talked about.
Bolezen, smrt, vse to, o čemer smo govorili.
But like the water lily,
Ampak kot lokvan,
we can take our stem and put it down in the pure sand.
lahko ta naš pecel gre dol v ta čisti pesek.
I consider the pure sand to be God's promises, God's words.
Zame je ta čisti pesek Božja beseda, njegove obljube.
What God thinks of us, what He plans for us.
Kaj Bog misli o nas, kaj Bog načrtuje za
The
nas.
beautiful promises.
Čudovite obljube.
And as we do that, we're going to draw hope and love and life and perfume to bless the world.
In ko to delamo, enostavno črpamo upanje, svetlobo, dišavo.
During this pandemic, we have launched a mental health initiative.
V času te pandemije smo sprožili eno inicijativo za mentalno zdravje.
Trying to bring perfume to the world.
Poskušali smo na nek način odišaviti svet.
If you go to Youth Alive portal, you will see a mental health page.
Če boste šli na portal Youth Alive, boste videli stran za mentalno zdravje.
And you can be part of this.
In lahko ste del tega.
You can join in, sign up, and you will receive emails and access resources.
Lahko se pridružite, dobili boste e-maile in pa dostop do virov.
We have a lot of resources for addiction recovery.
Imamo kar nekaj virov za osvoboditev od odvisnosti.
We have a pornography resource for people
Vir
struggling.
za tiste, ki se borijo s pornografijo.
And so there are many things that we can do, some of the things you are already doing now.
In veliko stvari je, ki jih lahko naredimo, nekatere delate tudi že.
I want to end today with this beautiful promise.
In rada bi zaključila današnji dan z to čudovito obljubo.
In the book of Isaiah 58,
V knjigi preroka Izaija, 58. poglavju,
verses 10 to 12 from the Message Bible,
vrstice 10 do 12 iz prevoda The Message,
God promises that He will give us a full life in the emptiest of places.
Bog obljublja, da nam bo dal polno življenje v najbolj praznih krajih.
Are you in an empty place? Do you feel like you're living in an empty place?
Ste vi mogoče, imate občutek, da ste v kakem takem praznem kraju, da živite
God
tam?
can give us a full life in this empty
Bog
place.
nam lahko tam da polno življenje.
Are you in a dry land?
Ste na suhi zemlji?
You're not. You're in a beautiful Slovenia. There's green and beauty here.
Vi ste v čudoviti zeleni Sloveniji,
But in spite of that, in their life, people might be feeling like they're in a dry
ampak
land.
kljub temu ljudje lahko čutijo, da so v svojem življenju v pustem kraju, v puščavi.
God says you'll be like a well-watered garden, a gurgling spring that never runs dry.
Bog pravi, da boš kakor dobro namakan vrt, kakor vodni vrelec, ki mu voda ne usahne.
And I love this verse on the Message Bible.
In všeč mi je to besedilo iz prevoda The
It
Message.
says, you will be known and those people that can fix anything.
Znani boste kot ljudje, ki lahko vse naredijo,
That can restore old ruins.
ki lahko obnovijo stare razvaline,
Rebuild and renovate.
ponovno zgradijo in obnovijo
And make the community livable again.
in naredijo skupnost spet vredno življenja.
I think, my dear brothers and sisters, God is calling us, sending us to make the community livable again.
Mislim, da nas, dragi moji sestre in bratje, Bog kliče in poziva in pošilja, da to skupnost naredimo spet vredno življenje.
This is your desire because we had lots of you there learning how to coach people, how to engage them.
Vem, da je to vaša želja. Imeli smo v Marušicu veliko ljudi tukaj navzoči, ki so se želeli naučiti,
Even
kako
your
pomagati
president
drugim.
was there sitting, exercising with others, learning.
Vsi smo bili tam, se učili.
We know you're doing things through ADRA.
Vem, da delate stvari po Adri.
I know you're doing things for youth, for health,
Vem, da
through
delate
cooking
stvari
classes.
za mlade, za zdravje.
Reaching out like with mental health for the people struggling.
Da dosegate ljudi, ki se borijo z mentalnimi stiskami.
These are all ways to make the community livable.
To so vse načini, kaj lahko naredimo, da ta skupnost postane spet vredna življenja.
And here is God's invitation, I think, to us.
In mislim, da je to Božji namig za vse nas.
Will we go and do more?
Ali bomo šli in naredili več?
Will we go and break down the stigma of mental health?
Ali bomo šli in zrušili to stigmo mentalnega zdravja?
Will we go and help people see different ways of thinking with a gift of perspective?
Bomo šli in pomagali ljudem videti stvari drugače z darom perspektive?
Will we go and give the gift of present, listening to people, loving them?
Dali ljudem dar navzočnosti, jih imeli radi, jih poslušali?
Give the gift of clarity, helping them think differently.
Ljudem dar
about the
jasnosti,
circumstance.
pomagajmo jim, da razmišljajo drugače v okoliščinah.
And finally, give them the gift of support that comes from Jesus.
In dajte jim dar podpore, ki prihaja od Jezusa.
So I don't know how many of you may be struggling in your own mental health today.
Ne vem, kdo med vami ali koliko vas je, ki morda imate svoje mentalne stiske
Maybe
danes.
we have family members who are struggling.
Mogoče so to naši družinski člani.
Maybe you have a neighbor, maybe somebody across the street.
Mogoče sosed, nekdo na drugi strani ulice.
Maybe some young people who are not here and that you're seeing they're absent.
Mogoče mladi, ki niso tukaj, pa jih tudi ni, manjkajo drugače.
One thing we can do is love on them,
Ena stvar, ki jo lahko naredimo, je, da jih imamo radi.
helping them see that God is their maker who loves them
In da jim pomagamo videti, da je Bog njihov stvarnik, ki jih ljubi.
and love them along the way.
In jih tudi mi ljubimo ves čas na poti.